A former Navy SEAL working two jobs to keep his son fed. A billionaire woman seconds away from vanishing forever. One rainy night, one decision that cost him blood and started a war he never asked for. No backup, no weapon, just instinct, muscle memory, and the kind of stubborn refusal to walk away that gets men killed or celebrated, rarely anything in between. This is the story of Derek Callahan, and it begins the way all the best and worst nights of his life began, with rain and someone needing help, and Derek too damn principled to pretend he didn't see it. If this story moves you, hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this goes. Now stay with me. Every single word of this matters. The rain had been falling since early afternoon, the kind of heavy, windless rain that soaks through a jacket in 30 seconds and turns every sidewalk into a shallow river. By 9 o'clock, it had driven most people indoors, leaving downtown Raleigh looking like a city someone had mostly given up on for the night. The streets reflected back the yellow and red of traffic signals in long, trembling streaks across the wet asphalt. A few taxis crept past. A couple sharing one umbrella jogged toward a parking garage. Otherwise, nothing. Derek Callahan stood outside the service entrance of the Meridian Grand Hotel, finishing the last 10 minutes of his valet shift, his collar soaked and his shoulders carrying the particular kind of tiredness that doesn't come from one long day, but from approximately 800 long days strung together without enough sleep between them. He was 32 years old and looked it, not in a soft way, but in the way of someone who'd spent years doing hard physical work and hadn't quite figured out when to stop pushing. His jaw carried 3 days of stubble he hadn't had time to shave. His knuckles were chapped from the cold. The hotel's uniform jacket fit him poorly across the shoulders because it was made for someone who hadn't spent 4 years doing underwater demolition and close-quarters combat. He checked his watch. 9:47. 13 minutes and he could clock out, drive the 12 minutes back to Mrs. Alvarez's house on Birch Street, pay her the $40 cash he owed for watching Noah until 10, and then maybe, sit down for 20 minutes before his alarm went off at 5:15 for his second job at the warehouse on Garner Road. He'd been running this schedule for 7 months. He didn't complain about it, at least not out loud, because complaining didn't move money from one side of the ledger to the other, and Noah needed new shoes by Thursday, and his water heater had been making a sound for 2 weeks that water heaters should not make. He was thinking about the water heater when he heard the sound. It wasn't loud. That was the first thing that struck him about it. The way it cut through the noise of rain and distant traffic, not because it was particularly sharp, but because it was wrong. A scuffling sound, something hard hitting pavement. And then, underneath it, quickly suppressed, a sound that his nervous system recognized before his conscious mind caught up. A woman's voice cutting off mid-breath, like a sentence interrupted by a hand closing over a mouth. Derek turned. The side alley ran between the hotel and the parking structure next to it, a narrow stretch of shadow that the nearest streetlight barely touched. He could make out shapes, 3 of them, big, and a 4th shape, smaller, struggling, wearing something dark red that caught what little light existed. He didn't think. This was the part that people who hadn't served couldn't quite understand, that after enough training, after enough real situations, the thinking and the moving stopped being 2 separate events. His body was already moving toward the alley before the rational part of his brain had fully processed what he was looking at. His rational brain caught up about 4 steps in, noted that there were 3 large men, and he had no weapon and no backup, and then stepped aside because it knew from long experience that Derek Callahan was not the kind of man who let that stop him. "Hey," his voice came out flat and carry. "Hey, back up." The 3 men turned. In the thin light, he could see them better now. Professional. That registered immediately. The way they'd positioned themselves. The way one of them had already shifted to cover the woman, while the other 2 turned to deal with him. Not street criminals. Not opportunists. These men had done this before, and had a plan, and Derek had just inserted himself into the middle of it. "Walk away," one of them said. He had an accent Derek couldn't immediately place. Eastern European, maybe. His voice was very calm, which was worse than if it had been threatening. Calm meant confidence. Calm meant he didn't think Derek was a real problem. "This is not your business. Walk away." "I can't do that," Derek said. He was still moving, not toward them directly, but at an angle, which most people don't think to do, and which creates problems for anyone trying to track you. His eyes were cataloging. The guy on the left was the biggest, maybe 6'3", but he was carrying weight around the middle and standing slightly flat-footed. The one in the center who'd spoken was leaner, balanced differently, the one to watch. The third was positioned behind the woman, one arm across her chest, one hand near her face. The one in the center took a step toward him. Derek had approximately 1.5 seconds before this became a fight he was very likely to lose, outnumbered 3-1 with no weapon against men who were clearly trained and almost certainly armed. He spent those 1.5 seconds not retreating, not calculating odds, but picking his sequence. He'd learned a long time ago that in an uneven fight, your only advantage is going first and going hard, and not stopping until the math changes. He went first. He closed the distance to the center man faster than the man expected. People always underestimate closing speed in bad light. And hit him with an elbow strike to the side of the jaw that wasn't elegant, but was delivered with every ounce of force Derek had, and snapped the man's head sideways and put him on the ground. The big one on the left lunged, and Derek sidestepped badly, not cleanly, caught a forearm across his cheekbone that lit up his vision white for a half second, grabbed the man's arm on the way by, and used the momentum to drive him face first into the brick wall. He heard something crack. Could have been the wall. Could have been the man's nose. Either way, the man went down to his knees and stopped being a priority. 2 down. The third man, the one holding the woman, had made a decision. Instead of engaging Derek, he'd started pulling her backward toward a dark van that Derek was only now registering was parked 20 feet deeper in the alley, engine running, lights off. Smart. Keep the objective, sacrifice the team if necessary. Derek went after him. He covered ground fast, but the man had a 5-step head start and one hand free. And when Derek got close enough to grab him, the man spun and Derek felt something. A line of cold that became fire half a second later, drag across his left side just below his ribs. He grabbed the man's wrist, felt the knife, redirected it badly, took another shallow cut across his forearm, got both hands on the wrist and torqued it at an angle. Wrists aren't designed to go, and heard the knife hit the pavement. The woman wrenched herself free. The third man looked at Derek, then at the van, then at his 2 partners, one still on the ground, one trying to stand with one hand against the wall. He made the calculation quickly. Derek respected that, actually, the professionalism of it, and took 3 fast steps to the van, yanked the door, and the van moved before the door was even fully closed, tires hissing on wet pavement, disappearing around the far end of the alley. Derek stood in the rain with blood running down his side and his forearm, breathing hard, and looked at the woman in the crimson coat. She was looking back at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. Not quite shock, not quite calm, something between the two that suggested she'd spent enough of her life navigating dangerous situations to not fall completely apart, but hadn't quite experienced this particular kind of dangerous situation before. Her hair was dark and wet and plastered to one cheek. She was maybe 5'6", 30, maybe. Her coat was expensive, the kind you don't notice unless you've seen a lot of cheap ones, and one of the buttons had been torn off in the struggle. "Are you?" she started. "Are you?" he said, because she seemed like the more relevant question. She blinked. Yes, I think so." She looked at his arm, at where his hand was pressed against his side. "You're bleeding." "A little." "That's more than a little." "I've had worse," he said, which was true, and also the kind of thing that was not particularly useful to say in the current moment, but came out anyway. She pulled out her phone. Her hands weren't quite steady, but she dialed efficiently. "I need to call. There are people I need to call." "Call 911 first," Derek said. She looked at him. "Yes, of course." She pressed the phone to her ear. Her eyes didn't leave him. "What's your name?" "Derek." "Derek." She said it like she was committing it to memory. "I'm Vivian." He nodded. His side was starting to make itself known in a serious way, and he leaned against the alley wall because standing fully upright was beginning to cost more than he wanted to spend on it. In the distance, through the rain, he could hear a siren beginning. Someone else had called, or a camera had triggered an alert. Didn't matter. "Derek." Vivian had lowered the phone from her ear. Her voice was steadier now, controlled. The voice of someone who spent a lot of time being in control of things. "Who are you?" He almost said nobody, which was what he usually said to that question, in one form or another. Instead, he said, "I work here. Valet." He paused. "Former Navy SEAL, if that's relevant." She stared at him. The sirens were getting closer. "It's relevant," she said quietly. The paramedics who arrived 11 minutes later wanted to put Derek on a gurney, and he declined, which started a low-grade argument that lasted the entire time they were cleaning and closing the gash on his side. 4 inches long, not deep enough to hit anything serious. The kind of wound that looked dramatic and felt worse than it was. His forearm needed 8 stitches. He sat on the back bumper of the ambulance and answered the police officer's questions in the flat, precise way that he'd answered official questions for most of his adult life, giving facts in sequence and nothing extraneous. "You engaged 3 armed individuals with no weapon," the officer said. He was maybe 27, a little wide-eyed. "By yourself." "I didn't know they were armed until the 3rd one pulled a knife," Derek said. "And by then we were already into it." The officer wrote something, then looked up. "And you're a valet." "And a warehouse loader. I do both." "Former military?" "Navy SEAL, got out 2 years ago." The officer looked at him for a moment with the particular expression Derek had seen from people who were recalibrating their understanding of who they were talking to. "Sir," he said, "that woman over there is Vivian Sterling." Derek looked across the parking lot to where Vivian stood beside a large black SUV, talking to 3 people in dark suits who had materialized with remarkable speed and who were clearly not hotel security. "I don't know who that is." "Vivian Sterling," the officer repeated, as if the name itself should be doing more work. "Sterling Capital Group. She's worth—" Stopped. "She's very wealthy, very prominent. There are going to be more people here soon. Reporters probably. FBI maybe." Derek looked at the officer, then back at his arm where the bandage was already showing a small pink bloom of seepage. "I just need to make sure I can still clock out," he said. "I need to call my son's babysitter." The officer blinked. "You're my son. He's 7. I told his babysitter I'd be there by 10. It was now 10:23 sets. Mrs. Alvarez did not charge him extra for the additional hour, which was something he would not forget. She met him at the door with a look at his bandaged arm and his pale face that could have gone either way. Concern or the beginning of a speech about stability and children needing dependable fathers. And then she simply said, "Noah's asleep. He was fine. There's soup on the stove." She pressed his hand once and left. Derek stood in his kitchen for a long moment. The house was small. A 2-bedroom rental on a street where half the houses had some kind of decorative issue they couldn't afford to fix, vinyl siding peeling here, gutters pulling loose there. His was the one with the rosebush Noah had insisted on planting in the spring, and which Derek had kept alive through what felt like sheer stubbornness. It smelled like Mrs. Alvarez's chicken soup and Noah's particular brand of child disorder. Socks on the couch, a crayon drawing half-finished on the coffee table, a dinosaur figurine standing sentinel on top of the television. He sat down at the kitchen table very carefully. His side pulled and burned. He pressed his palm against the bandage and waited for the worst of it to pass. On the table was Noah's homework, 2nd-grade math, addition and subtraction, half the problems done in his crooked, careful handwriting. Derek stared at it for a while. 4 + 7 = 11. Noah had erased and rewritten the 11 twice. You could still see the ghost of the first attempt. He thought about the woman in the crimson coat, about the way the knife had felt, that cold then fire sensation he'd experienced twice before in his life and had hoped not to experience again, about the van disappearing into the rain, about the fact that those men had been professional, which meant they had a client, which meant whoever wanted Vivian Sterling had money and planning behind them, and 3 unconscious or fled operatives would not end the effort. He was not her security detail. He was not in that world anymore. He had soup on the stove and a kid asleep in the next room and an alarm set for 5:15 and a water heater that was probably going to cost him $600. He got up, poured soup into a bowl, and sat back down. He was halfway through it when his phone rang. Unknown number. He looked at it for 3 rings, then picked up. Derek Callahan? A woman's voice, professional, measured, not Vivian. Yeah. My name is Rachel Holt. I'm the head of security for Sterling Capital Group. Ms. Sterling asked me to call and check on your condition and to pass along her personal. How did you get my number? A brief pause. Ms. Sterling has resources. Right. He put his spoon down. Tell her I'm fine. Stitches, but nothing serious. She also wanted to make sure you understand that the company will cover all medical costs. That's not necessary. Mr. Callahan, I don't need it covered. Thank her for the thought. Another pause, longer this time. He got the sense Rachel Holt was not a woman accustomed to people declining things. She'd also like to speak with you personally when you're feeling up to it. Derek looked at Noah's math homework, at the twice-erased 11. I work tomorrow. I'm free after 7. Tomorrow evening. Yeah. I'll let her know. Take care of yourself, Mr. Callahan. He hung up, finished his soup, rinsed the bowl in the sink and stood there for a moment looking at his own reflection in the dark window over the faucet. Tired face, fading bruise already purpling under his left eye where the big man's forearm had connected. He looked older than 32. He usually did. He checked on Noah before bed. His son slept the way 7-year-olds sleep, which is to say completely and without apparent concern for the position of his limbs, one arm flung over his head, the dinosaur comforter kicked half off. His hair, which needed cutting, which was on the list, was dark and stuck up at an angle that Derek had never successfully predicted or corrected. He was a small, fierce, deeply earnest person who had opinions about cereal brands and took his responsibilities as the class's designated hamster monitor with a seriousness that Derek found quietly extraordinary. Derek pulled the comforter back over him. Noah didn't wake up. All right, Derek said to the room, to nothing, to the general accumulating weight of the day. Then he went to bed. He woke to his phone going off at 5:15 as usual, and also to 3 missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize and 17 text messages, which was not usual. He stared at them for a moment. Then he put the phone face down, got up, made coffee, packed Noah's lunch, peanut butter and honey, apple slices, the small bag of pretzels Noah had recently decided were essential, and got his son up and through the morning routine that Derek had, over 7 months, refined to a fairly efficient 22 minutes, which felt like a minor military achievement in its own right. Dad, Noah said at breakfast, with the directness of someone who hadn't yet learned to ease into subjects. Your arm has a thing on it. Bandage. I got a cut last night. Noah considered this. A bad cut? Medium. I'm fine. Does it hurt? A little. Noah went back to his cereal, stirring it in the particular circular way he always stirred it, which Derek had never commented on and never would. Then, did you get in a fight? Derek looked at his son. What makes you say that? Your eye is purple. He'd forgotten about the bruise. Yeah, I got in a fight. Noah processed this. Did the other guy look worse? Noah. I'm just asking. Yes, Derek said. Significantly worse. Eat your cereal. Noah ate his cereal, but he was looking at his father with those dark, serious eyes of his that Derek sometimes found a little startling. The eyes of someone taking careful inventory of what was happening and storing it, not for immediate use, but for later, when he'd worked out what it meant. Derek dropped him at school, drove to the warehouse, and spent 6 hours doing physical work that, on a normal day, he barely noticed. Today, his side reminded him of itself every time he lifted anything above his waist, which was frequently because the job essentially consisted of lifting things above his waist. He did it anyway. He didn't mention it to anyone. At noon, his supervisor, a good-natured, heavy-set man named Terry, who'd hired Derek without asking too many questions about why a former Navy SEAL wanted a warehouse job, appeared at his station holding his phone out with the particular expression of someone delivering unusual news. You're on the news, Terry said. Derek took the phone. A local news site. Headline, Mystery Hero Saves Billionaire from Kidnapping Attempt. Rally. There was a photo taken from security camera footage. grainy but recognizably him standing in the alley. Another photo of Vivian Sterling at some earlier event, in a different coat. A few lines of text describing, with some dramatic license, what had happened. He handed the phone back. Hmm? Terry stared at him. That's you. Looks like. Derek, that's... You saved a billionaire. I helped a woman who was being kidnapped. She happened to be a billionaire. Terry continued staring. You got stabbed. Cut. Smaller than it sounds. He picked up the next package. His side pulled. He kept his face neutral. I need to finish this section before 2 o'clock. By 3 o'clock, when his warehouse shift ended, his phone had 64 missed calls, and his name was on national news. He met Vivian Sterling the following evening at a private conference room in a building downtown that had security she'd clearly brought in specifically for the occasion. Not her usual corporate security, but men who moved and watched the way Derek recognized from his own operational experience. Professional. Well briefed. He was scanned at the entrance, politely but thoroughly, which he didn't object to. The conference room was on the 14th floor. Wide windows, good view of the city at dusk, the last light going orange over the buildings. The furniture was the kind that costs more than Derek made in 2 months, and is designed to look like it doesn't. There was a water pitcher and glasses on the table. Rachel Holt, whom he'd spoken to on the phone, a sharp-faced woman in her 40s with the composed watchfulness of a former intelligence professional, stood by the window and nodded once when Derek came in. Vivian Sterling came in 2 minutes later. She looked different from the alley, which was obvious because in the alley she'd been wet and scared and mid-kidnapping, conditions that were not anyone's best. Now she was composed, dressed in a charcoal blazer, her dark hair pulled back. She was also, Derek noticed, looking at him the same way she had in the alley, like she was genuinely trying to figure out who he was rather than confirming something she'd already decided. Mr. Callahan. She extended her hand. Her grip was firm, dry. People who extended a firm, dry handshake were not necessarily trustworthy, but they were at least aware that handshakes were a form of communication. Derek is fine, he said. Derek, she gestured to the chairs. Please sit. He sat. She sat across from him. Rachel remained by the window, present but back. How's your side? Vivian asked. Fine, healing. I read the paramedic report. She paused. I hope you don't mind. I needed to understand what happened and in what sequence. He didn't mind particularly. What do you want to know? I've already read the police report, the security footage. Rachel spoke to the responding officer. She folded her hands on the table. What I actually want to know is, what were you thinking when you turned toward that alley? He thought about it honestly. I wasn't, really. I heard something that sounded wrong and my body moved. The thinking came after. The thinking being 3 big guys, 1 woman who clearly didn't want to be there, a running van with its lights off. I had maybe a second and a half to make a decision. And you went in anyway, unarmed. I didn't have a lot of other options that felt right. She studied him. You could have called 911 from the street. She might not have had 4 minutes. Vivian was quiet for a moment. They had her for almost 90 seconds before you intervened. I kept counting that back, trying to... She stopped. Reset. The FBI believes if you hadn't intervened when you did, I would have been in that van. Probably, Derek agreed. You don't seem particularly... She searched for the word. Affected by that. I'm affected, he said. I'm just not... He stopped because he didn't have a clean sentence for it. I spent a long time in situations where things went wrong and people didn't make it. I learned not to spend a lot of time on the version of events that didn't happen. I focus on what did. What did happen is that you put yourself between me and 3 professional kidnappers and took a knife doing it. Yeah. Why? He looked at her. Because someone was in trouble and I was there. She held his gaze for a long moment. It was the kind of question he'd answered in briefings and debriefs and psych evals, and he'd always given versions of the same answer because it was always the true one. Some people found it insufficient, like there had to be more to it. He'd stopped trying to provide more when there wasn't. I want to offer you something, Vivian said, and I need you to hear it out before you respond, because my instinct is that you'll say no immediately, and I'd like to make the case first. Okay. She took a breath, barely perceptible, but there. I'm establishing a foundation, the Sterling Public Safety Foundation. Its mandate is community safety programs, neighborhood watch modernization, training civilian volunteers in emergency response, supporting small police departments in underserved areas, that kind of work. It's funded, structured, and ready to operate. What it doesn't have is someone to run it. Derek said nothing, because she'd asked him not to. I've had 12 candidates through my door in the last 3 months, she continued. Former law enforcement, former military, people with the right credentials and the right resume, and who said exactly what I expected them to say. None of them, she paused again. None of them walked into an alley unarmed to stop a kidnapping because someone needed help. None of them had a 7-year-old son they were going home to check on afterward. She met his eyes. None of them said because someone was in trouble and I was there, and meant it the way you mean it. The city dusk was going deeper outside the windows. Derek could see his own reflection starting to appear in the glass, overlaid on the darkening skyline. I'm not a businessman, he said. I'm not looking for a businessman. I don't have a degree in nonprofit administration or GE. I have people who have those degrees. I don't have someone with judgment. Those are different things. She leaned forward slightly. I'm not asking you to do this because you saved my life. I'm asking you because of how you saved my life, and because of what you said to the police officer when he asked if you knew who I was. He didn't remember saying anything particularly notable to the police officer. What did I say? He told you later, apparently, that you were aware you'd been watching his car improperly and would accept the ticket. A ghost of something crossed her face. Not quite a smile. You'd just taken 2 knife wounds stopping a kidnapping, and you were concerned about a parking citation. He had genuinely forgotten about the parking citation. The car rolled a little. It wasn't properly secured. Derek. Her voice was quiet now, stripped of the executive register. I know what your situation is. I know what you make and where you live, and that your son's school requested forms you haven't had time to file, and that your water heater is going to fail in probably the next 30 days. I have resources, and I use them because I needed to understand who you were. I'm not telling you this to embarrass you. I'm telling you because... She stopped. Searched. I want you to know that I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you a job that I genuinely think you might be the only right person for. And the salary is enough that you don't have to work 2 jobs anymore. The room was quiet except for the distant muted sounds of the city below. Derek looked at his hands. The right one, the knuckles still lightly abraded from the alley wall. The left, with its bandaged forearm. He thought about Noah's half-finished math homework. He thought about the rosebush that was somehow still alive. He thought about 5:15 in the morning and the warehouse and his side pulling every time he lifted above his waist. He also thought about the 3 men in the alley, the van's retreating taillights in the rain, and the fact that they were still out there, that whoever had hired them was still out there, and that the situation was not over in the way that situations like that are never really over until someone makes them over. I'll think about it, he said. Vivian nodded. She'd been expecting something different, probably, but she received his answer without pressure. That's fair? There are some things I'd need to understand first, about what happened the other night, about what the FBI is finding. I can arrange that. And I'd need... He stopped. This part felt strange to say because it was personal, and he was not accustomed to mixing personal into professional conversations. I'd need to understand what the risk level is to my son before I commit to anything that puts me in the proximity of these people. Vivian's expression shifted. Something in it became briefly less boardroom and more human. Of course, she said. That comes first. That would always come first. He nodded, stood, extended his hand. She shook it again. Same firm grip. I'll be in touch, he said. I know you will, she said. And there was something in how she said it, not cocky, but certain, the way you're certain about something you've decided to bet on, that stayed with him in the elevator down, in the parking garage, during the drive to pick up Noah from Mrs. Alvarez's, all the way to the moment he turned his key in his front door and heard his son's voice from inside. "Dad? Dad, you're on the news. Mrs. Alvarez showed me. Did you really fight 3 guys?" Derek pushed the door open. Noah was standing in the middle of the living room in his socks, holding the TV remote, his eyes very wide. "I did," Derek said. "All at once?" "Mostly." Noah stared at him. "That is," he said with great gravity, "extremely cool. It was also stupid, and I don't recommend it. But cool, though." "Noah." "Okay. Okay, but Dad." His son crossed the room and hugged him around the middle, which Derek accepted even though it pressed directly on his stitched side, because some things are worth the cost. "Are you okay?" "I'm good, bud." "Promise?" "Promise." Noah pulled back and looked up at him with those serious inventory-taking eyes. "What happens now?" Derek looked at his son. He thought about the alley and the rain and the knife and the van's retreating lights. He thought about Vivian Sterling's voice saying, "That comes first, that would always come first." He thought about 5:15 alarms and water heaters and the particular weight of 7 months of doing everything alone and still not quite doing enough. "I'm not sure yet," he said honestly, "but I'm working on it." Noah accepted this. He had long ago learned in the quiet, faithful way of children who don't have other options to trust that when his father said he was working on something, the thing would eventually get worked out. It wasn't a lesson Derek had ever tried to teach him. It was just what the evidence had shown. "Okay," Noah said. "There's soup. Mrs. Alvarez made a lot of soup. She always does. It's really good, though. It always is." They went to the kitchen. Derek served soup. Noah talked about his day. The hamster had escaped briefly. There had been significant drama. It had been recaptured behind the bookshelf, and everyone was fine. Derek listened and asked appropriate questions and felt the stitches in his side and thought about everything, all of it, the whole accumulated weight of where his life had brought him and where it might be going. Outside, the rain had started again. He could hear it against the kitchen window, the same quiet persistence it had carried the night before, falling over the city without particular urgency, just falling because that was what it did. Derek Callahan listened to his son describe the hamster rescue with appropriate grave detail and ate his soup and thought about what happens next. He didn't sleep well. That wasn't new. Derek hadn't slept cleanly since well before he left the Navy, and the stitches in his side gave him a concrete physical reason on top of whatever his brain was doing on its own. He lay on his back in the dark, listening to the rain finish itself off sometime around 2 in the morning, and then to the particular quality of silence that comes after rain stops. And he thought about the van, the running engine, the lights off. Someone had positioned that van in that alley before the team moved in, which meant someone had known Vivian Sterling's movements that evening with enough precision to stage an extraction. That wasn't surveillance from a distance. That was inside information, or something close to it. He didn't know why he kept turning that over. It wasn't his problem. Except that he'd made it his problem, in the most literal sense, by walking into that alley, and the knife scar on his side was going to remind him of that decision every morning for the next several months, whether he chose to stay involved or not. At 5:15, he got up. The FBI came to him 3 days after his meeting with Vivian. 2 agents, both younger than he expected, one named Reyes and one named Park, who met him at a diner 2 blocks from his house because he'd refused to go to a federal building on his day off. Reyes did most of the talking. Park took notes and occasionally looked at Derek with the specific expression of someone recalculating. "We've identified 2 of the 3 men from the alley," Reyes said. She had her coffee black and her questions direct, which Derek respected. "Both Eastern European nationals, both with histories in private military contracting in the post-Soviet bloc. The 3rd man, the one who got away cleanest. We have a partial plate from the van and some footage, but nothing confirmed yet." "Professional," Derek said. "Very. This wasn't local. Someone hired internationally, which means resources and planning time. We're looking at a minimum of 4 to 6 weeks of preparation." Derek wrapped both hands around his mug. "What does Vivian Sterling know about who might have done it?" Reyes and Park exchanged a brief look. "She has a former business partner named Martin Gale. The relationship ended badly. There's litigation, breach of contract claims, some allegations about financial irregularities that the SEC looked at and didn't prosecute but didn't fully close either. He's been publicly hostile. Private communications have been, Reyes chose her word carefully, escalating. You think it's him? We think it's worth a serious look. Has he been brought in? He has lawyers, Park said, which meant no. Derek drank his coffee. What's your ask? You were there. You saw the three men up close, in motion. One of them spoke to you. We'd like you to work through what you observed in detail. Not just what you told the responding officers, but everything. Trained eye, close quarters. You might have picked up things you haven't consciously cataloged yet. He spent 2 hours with them. He was more useful than he'd expected to be. He'd registered details without knowing he'd registered them, the way the body does when it's been trained to, and walking back through the sequence with Reyes and Park pulled some of those details out. The speaker's accent refined to specifically Northern Russian, or possibly Belarusian, based on certain vowel patterns. The big man's right hand had a surgical scar consistent with a specific type of tendon repair. The van had custom window tinting on the rear panel that was slightly different in shade from the factory tinting on the sides, suggesting a repair or modification. That's useful, Reyes said, writing. That's actually very useful. One more thing, Derek said. He'd been holding this until he understood who he was talking to. The woman who called Vivian Sterling's location in to whoever hired this team, because someone did, she was at that hotel that night. Not as a guest. I saw her in the lobby when I was at the valet stand at 8:30. She was watching the front entrance and checking her phone. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Both agents went still. Can you describe her? Park said. He could. He did. Reyes was typing on her phone before he finished. When he left the diner, his own phone showed a missed call from Vivian's number. He called back from the parking lot, standing in the cold morning with his collar up. You gave them the woman in the lobby, Vivian said without preamble. You were listening? Rachel was. She was in the diner. A pause. I'm sorry. I should have told you that up front. I'm not accustomed to situations where I'm not monitoring everything. He thought about being annoyed and decided it wasn't worth it. The FBI is competent. Let them work the lead. I know. Her voice was slightly strange. He couldn't identify why. Derek, I've been thinking about what you said, about your son, about the risk. And? My security team has been doing a threat assessment since the night it happened. The working conclusion is that whoever hired those men may try again. She stopped. And that you're now identifiable. Your name is public, your face is on the news, and your connection to me is people know you work for the hotel. That's enough to find your address, your son's school. The cold felt different suddenly, more specific. How serious? Serious enough that Rachel wants to recommend precautionary measures. He stood very still in the parking lot. A car went past. Someone's radio, a second of music, then gone. What kind of measures? Temporary relocation, somewhere with proper security. It would be, Rachel can explain it better. But Derek, her voice dropped the executive register entirely. I'm not telling you this to control the situation. I'm telling you because you have a 7-year-old and you deserve to know the actual picture. He appreciated that more than he could readily say. I'll talk to Rachel, he said, and I'll make my own decision. Of course. And Vivian. He waited until he was sure she was listening fully. If this is real, if there's genuine risk to Noah, then I'm going to need you to be straight with me about everything from here on, not what your security team decides I need to know. Everything. A long moment, long enough that he thought she might push back. Instead, that's fair. I can do that. Okay? He hung up and stood there a little longer in the cold, looking at nothing in particular, recalibrating. The last 2 years had been about making everything simpler. 2 jobs, 1 kid, 1 house, forward motion, nothing complicated. He had been, by the standards of his previous life, living something close to a quiet existence. It had required constant work, and he'd been tired all the time, but it had been his kind of tired, earned, and familiar. This was a different kind of problem, the kind that didn't stay in a lane. He picked up Noah from school that afternoon himself, which he rarely got to do midweek. His son came down the front steps carrying his backpack with both straps on, which he only did when the bag was too heavy, and stopped when he saw Derek's car. "You're here," Noah said. "Not suspicious, just registering." "I'm here." Noah got in the car, put his bag in the back, buckled his seatbelt with the focused efficiency of someone who took seatbelts seriously. "Are we doing something?" "I want to talk to you about something," Derek said. "Nothing bad, but something." Noah looked at him. He had inherited, from somewhere Derek couldn't quite trace, the ability to be very still when he was paying attention. "Okay." Derek drove a block before he started. "You know the thing that happened the other night? The thing in the alley? With the three guys? Yeah, it turns out, because of that, some people now know who I am and where we live. And there might be some people who aren't very friendly. So for a little while, I want us to stay somewhere different, safer." Noah was quiet for a moment. "Like, move?" "Temporarily. It would be like somewhere with better security, and I'd be there." "Would Mrs. Alvarez come?" "No, but we'd figure out arrangements for—" "What about my hamster monitoring responsibilities?" Derek blinked. He had genuinely not anticipated this specific concern. "We'd coordinate with your teacher." Noah processed this with the seriousness it apparently warranted. "Okay, when?" "Probably soon, a few days." "Can I bring my dinosaurs?" "Yes." "All of them?" "How many are there?" 47. Derek absorbed this number. He had not known it was 47. "Yes," he said. "All 47. Noah nodded, apparently satisfied, and looked out the window. Then, without turning back, "Dad, those people who aren't friendly, they're not going to come to our house, are they?" Derek kept his eyes on the road. "No, that's why we're going somewhere else before they get the chance." "Okay." A pause. "You'd stop them anyway, right? Like you stopped the other guys." "I would, but I'd rather just not be in a position where that's necessary." "That's smart," Noah said. "Like, strategic." "Yeah, strategic." They drove home. Noah did his homework at the kitchen table. The math was finished this time, all the answers written clean without visible erasure, and he'd drawn a small dinosaur in the margin that had no business being there but that Derek did not comment on. Derek called Rachel Holt and spent 40 minutes getting the details of the proposed security arrangement, and then spent another 20 asking questions that Rachel answered with the directness he was coming to associate with her, which he appreciated. The proposed location was a private estate 40 minutes outside the city, owned by Sterling Capital Group, currently staffed with a full security rotation. Derek could work remotely. Noah would have space to move around. There were contingency plans at multiple levels. "How long?" Derek asked. "Until we know what we're dealing with," Rachel said. "Best case, a week or two. Worst case, we don't know yet. I need to talk to my son's school, my employers, my neighbor. We can help coordinate any of that." "I'll do it myself," he said. "I don't want people confused about who they're getting calls from." He heard something that might have been approval in Rachel's pause. "Of course." He told Terry at the warehouse the next morning. Terry listened without interrupting, which took visible effort, and then said, "So you're going into, like, protective custody?" "It's not exactly," Derek started, "because you stopped a kidnapping. Because of subsequent developments related to that, yes." "Derek," Terry leaned against the forklift with his arms crossed and the expression of a man experiencing something outside his normal daily range. "You could have just driven home that night." "I know. But you didn't." "I know." Terry shook his head, then extended his hand. "Job's here when this is over. I'll tell the warehouse manager it's a family emergency, which is technically true. Don't worry about it." Derek shook his hand. "Thank you, Terry. Don't get stabbed again." "Working on it." He gave his notice at the hotel by phone because going in person with his face on the news felt like a bad idea. His manager was sympathetic and confused in equal measure, which seemed like a reasonable response to the circumstances. He told Mrs. Alvarez in person because she deserved that. She listened on her front porch with her arms folded and her face arranged in the careful, neutral expression she used when she was deciding whether to say the things she was actually thinking. Then she said, "That woman, Vivian Sterling, she's doing right by you?" "She's trying to," Derek said. "That's a different thing from doing right." "I know. I'm paying attention." Mrs. Alvarez nodded slowly. "Noah has an extra pair of sneakers here. I'll get them." She went inside and came back with the sneakers and also a bag of food. A container of soup, tortillas wrapped in foil, a small jar of salsa that she pressed into his hands with the particular firmness of someone ensuring that no argument would be entertained. "You call me," she said. "If anything happens, you call me first." "I will." She looked at him the way she'd looked at him since the first week he'd moved in next door, with the combination of exasperation and something that might have been motherly concern that he'd never quite known what to do with and had decided to simply accept gratefully. "You did a brave thing," she said. "I'm not sure it was a smart thing." "Probably both can be true," he said. She made a sound that was not quite agreement. "Go take care of your son." He did. They arrived at the estate on a Thursday evening, Derek driving his own car with Noah in the passenger seat surrounded by the 47 dinosaurs distributed across 2 bags and a backpack, Mrs. Alvarez's food in a cooler in the trunk, and Derek's own belongings in a single duffel that took him 20 minutes to pack because he had spent 2 years not accumulating things that couldn't be moved quickly. The estate was large, not ostentatiously so, but substantial, set back from a 2-lane road behind a gate and a stand of mature oaks that blocked the sight lines from the road in all directions. The security was present, but not aggressive. Men and one woman in plain clothes, positioned at intervals, who acknowledged Derek with nods and let Noah's wide-eyed tour of the grounds proceed without making it feel like a military installation. "This is really big," Noah said, standing in the main hallway. "It is." "Do we have to stay inside?" "There's a yard. You can use the yard." Noah pressed his nose against the window overlooking the back garden. "Is that a pond?" "Small one." "Are there fish?" "I have absolutely no idea." Noah turned from the window with an expression that suggested the fish question was now a priority. "I want to check. Tomorrow. Unpack first." Vivian arrived the following morning. Derek had known she'd be coming. Rachel had mentioned it, practically. But there was still a slight adjustment required when he heard the car on the drive and looked out to see her getting out with a laptop bag over one shoulder and a coffee in her hand, dressed like someone who worked for a living rather than like someone who owned the building they were standing in. He met her at the front door. "I wasn't expecting you this soon." "I wasn't planning to come this soon," she said. "There were developments." She looked past him into the hallway. "Is Noah settled?" He found the fish pond. Something in her face shifted. Not quite a smile, but close. "There are 3 koi. I should probably mention that before he names them." "Too late," Derek said. She walked inside. He followed. They settled at the kitchen table with her laptop open and coffee. Derek's, plain from the machine. Hers with something she'd brought herself that involved a small packet and brief mixing ritual. And she walked him through what Rachel had briefed her on the previous day, which was a more complete picture than Derek had received. The woman from the hotel lobby had been identified. Her name was Angela Marsh. She was an administrative employee at Sterling Capital Group, had been for 3 years, in a department that handled logistics and scheduling, which meant she would have had access to Vivian's calendar. She had not come to work in 2 days. Her apartment was empty. She'd withdrawn $4,000 in cash from an ATM 6 hours before the attempted kidnapping. Derek absorbed this. "Inside job." "Inside job," Vivian confirmed. Vivian said. Her voice was steady, but her hand around the coffee cup was not entirely steady. And Derek noticed this and did not comment on it. "Someone in my own company gave them my location, gave them my movements." "Do you have a guess about who coordinated with her?" "Martin Gale." She said the name flatly, the way you say the name of someone you once trusted. "He was my business partner for 6 years. We built Sterling Capital together. He came in at the seed stage, put in money in 18-hour days, and he was..." She stopped. "He was genuinely good at what he did. And then, 3 years ago, something changed, and I still don't know if it was greed or resentment or something else entirely, But he started making decisions that weren't ethical and then decisions that weren't legal. And when I put the brakes on it, he took it very personally. Personally like a lawsuit, Derek said, or personally like three guys in an alley. She looked at him. I didn't know the answer to that until 6 days ago. He nodded. Okay. What's the FBI doing with Gail? Watching him, building a case. They can't touch him yet without something solid linking him to the operation, and right now all they have is motive and Angela Marsh, who appears to have vanished quite successfully. She'll make a mistake, Derek said. People who run always make a mistake. Rachel says the same thing. Rachel's right. He paused. What about the 3 men from the alley? 2 are in federal custody. The third, she took a careful breath. The third, the one who got away. They haven't found him. Derek had expected this, but it still landed differently, hearing it stated plainly. The man who'd cut him, who'd been pulling Vivian toward the van, who'd had the presence of mind to make a clean exit while his team was going down. That kind of professional doesn't stop because the first attempt failed. He files it, regrouped, waits. He's still employed, Derek said. That's what we think. Which means Gail hasn't called it off. Or can't or won't. She looked at him steadily. I know this is more than you signed up for. I signed up for a walk across a parking lot and ended up in the middle of something I'm still catching up on, Derek said. But I'm not complaining. I just need to know everything that's known. You have it. All of it. She paused. That was our agreement. It was. She closed her laptop, looked out the kitchen window where the back garden was visible, and somewhere beyond it the small pond with 3 koi, who now had names Derek had been informed were Rex, Stomper, and Gerald. This feels strange to me, she said, not quite to him, more to the window. Being protected. I've had security my whole adult life in a professional sense, but I'm sitting in my own property feeling like I shouldn't move too fast or make too much noise. That feeling goes away, Derek said. She looked back at him. When? When you've been in enough situations where you actually couldn't move fast or make noise, makes you grateful for the situations where you're just uncomfortable. She was quiet for a moment. Was it like that? The Navy? He considered how to answer that honestly, without being either self-aggrandizing or falsely modest. There were long periods of exactly what I just described, and then periods that were different. The in-between was the hardest part, not the active situations, which your training handles, but the waiting to know which kind of moment you were in. And now? Now I'm waiting, he said, but I've done it before. She nodded slowly. Then, can I ask you something personal? You can ask. Why did you leave? The Navy. Rachel's contacts tell her you were exceptional. The record she pulled was... She stopped. You had a career most people in that field would spend 20 years chasing. Why 2 jobs and a rental house in Raleigh? He hadn't expected the question, or rather he'd expected a version of it, but not this version, not this directly. He took a drink of his coffee. Noah's mother left when he was 18 months old, he said. She wasn't built for the life, which is fair. That life asks a lot from the people around it, not just the person in it. She left and I could either stay in the service and put him with family, which... He stopped. My family situation is complicated, or I could get out and raise him myself. Vivian said nothing, which was the right response. The math wasn't complicated, he continued. The Navy was the best thing I'd ever been part of, and I was good at it, and I walked away without much of a plan, except that my son was not going to grow up without a father who showed up. The 2 jobs thing was, I didn't account for how expensive being a full-time parent is when you're starting from scratch. He shrugged, which pulled at his stitches a little. Working on it. You don't have to keep working on it the same way, Vivian said. That's what I was trying to tell you at the meeting. I know what you were telling me. He looked at her. I'm still thinking about it. You said you'd get back to me. I will. She almost smiled. You're deliberately frustrating. People tell me that. The days at the estate settled into a rhythm that was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable. Somewhere in the middle, the way all holding patterns feel. Derek ran security checks with Rachel's team every morning, which earned him a kind of professional respect from the team that he hadn't asked for but didn't mind. He worked through the FBI's additional questions via Reyes, who called 3 and sometimes 4 times a day with follow-up items. He learned the estate's layout in the specific way he'd learned the layouts of buildings in other countries. Not because anyone asked him to, but because his brain couldn't help cataloging entry points, sightlines, distances. Noah, meanwhile, adapted to the estate with the complete pragmatic flexibility of a 7-year-old who has learned that his father sometimes makes sudden decisions, and those decisions usually turn out to have been correct. He did his homework at the big kitchen table. He visited the fish pond twice daily. He developed an interest in the oak trees on the property, specifically whether they could be climbed, a question Derek answered with a conditional yes, and a set of rules that Noah accepted under mild protest. 3 days in, Noah found Vivian in the kitchen making tea at 7 in the morning. Derek had been on a call with Reyes and hadn't heard his son get up, and apparently engaged her in a conversation that lasted 45 minutes before Derek finished his call and came looking. He stood in the kitchen doorway. Noah was eating toast. Vivian was sitting across from him with a mug, and they appeared to be discussing, with equal seriousness, the relative merits of different Cretaceous period predators. Spinosaurus is bigger, Noah was explaining, but T-Rex has a better bite force to body weight ratio, so in a straight fight, I would have assumed size wins, Vivian said. That's what a lot of people assume. Noah shook his head. It's not that simple. Derek leaned against the doorframe. Vivian looked up and caught his eye, and again that thing crossed her face that was close to a smile, but wasn't quite. He pushed off the doorframe and came into the kitchen. Hey, he said to Noah, you're up early. Gerald was active, Noah said, with the authority of someone who had established firm monitoring protocols for a koi pond. I checked on him, and then I smelled toast. Okay? Noah looked between them with the specific 7-year-old awareness that he might be in the middle of something, accurately read the room, and picked up his plate. I'm going to eat this outside, he announced, to watch Gerald. Jacket, Derek said. I know, Dad. He was already heading for the back door. They listened to the door close. Derek poured himself coffee and sat at the table. Sorry about that. He wanders. Don't apologize, Vivian said. She paused, looking for the honest word rather than the easy one. He's very much his own person. He is. He told me his 3 responsibilities: homework, hamster monitoring, which he's very concerned about maintaining remotely, and apparently making sure you eat breakfast. Derek looked at his coffee. He mentioned that. He said you forget. I don't forget. I deprioritize. Vivian gave him a look that made clear she did not accept this distinction. He also told me you have 47 dinosaur figures, and you've never once told him to get rid of any of them, even though they take up a lot of space. They're his. He thinks that's... She stopped. Something in her expression shifted briefly, into territory Derek didn't have full sight of. He thinks that's evidence that you're a good father. Derek didn't say anything. Outside, he could see Noah sitting cross-legged by the pond in his jacket. He'd gotten the jacket, watching Gerald with complete concentration. He's right, Vivian said quietly. He's biased, Derek said. He's 7. He's required by law to think I'm a good father. I don't think that's actually a law. It should be, she laughed. It was a real one, not the controlled professional version he'd heard in the conference room. Shorter and a little surprised, like it had gotten out before she'd managed to give it appropriate authorization. She looked slightly startled by it herself. Then she looked at him and said, I haven't done that in a while. What? Laughed like I meant it. She wrapped both hands around her mug. My schedule for the past 3 years has been, I don't have a lot of moments like this. Sitting in a kitchen with a kid who knows more about dinosaurs than most paleontology students, and she stopped. It feels strange, but good strange. Strange is underrated, Derek said. Maybe. She looked out toward the pond. Derek, the foundation offer. I want you to know it stands regardless of what happens with all of this. If you decide you don't want the job, the situation doesn't change my respect for what you did or my... She was picking her words. My investment in you and Noah being safe. But if you decide you want it, I want you to want it because you believe in what it does. Not because I helped you when you needed it, and now you feel like you owe something. He looked at her directly. She meant it. He could tell when someone was saying the true thing rather than the strategic thing, and this was the true thing. I know, he said. I'm still thinking. I know you are. She held his gaze. I'm just making sure you're thinking about the right version of the question. Which is? Not, should I take a job from a billionaire, but is this something I'd be good at, and is it something that matters? He thought about that, about the programs she'd described. Neighborhood safety, civilian emergency training, supporting the communities that nobody with power ever quite got around to thinking about his 7 months doing 2 jobs and barely threading the needle of a decent life, and all the people he'd seen in the warehouse and the hotel parking lot who were threading the same needle, some of them less successfully. About what it might mean to do something that wasn't just survival. I'll have an answer for you soon, he said. She nodded. I'll be here. Outside, Noah had apparently decided that Gerald was behaving normally enough to permit him to take a break. He got up from the pond, brushed grass off his knees with the efficient thoroughness of someone who had been told about wet grass on pants, and started back toward the kitchen door. He looked up and saw them both through the window, and he raised one hand in a small wave that was mostly for Derek, but included Vivian, which Derek noticed and which cost him something, though he couldn't have said exactly what. It was on the 6th day at the estate that Derek's phone rang at 2 a.m. Not Reyes, not Rachel. A number he didn't recognize, and he didn't answer unknown numbers at 2 a.m. normally, but something about the specific time and the fact that he'd been awake anyway told him to pick up. Derek Callahan. The voice was male, calm, accented in exactly the way the man in the alley had been accented. Derek was sitting up before the voice had finished his name. His mind ran the recognition and categorized it in the same instant. Yeah, he said. His voice came out flat, controlled. You are in the estate on Rouchard Road, the voice said. I know this. I also know about the boy. A pause. I am telling you this not as a threat. As a professional communication, you should take the boy somewhere else. Who are you? Someone who did a job and now wishes he had not. The man who hired us, he does not stop. When he decides something, he does not stop. Another pause. The boy was not part of the original arrangement. He is not part of mine. But I cannot speak for what comes next. The line went dead. Derek sat in the dark for 3 seconds. Then he got up, moved quietly to Noah's room, confirmed his son was asleep, confirmed it with his own eyes, hand briefly on Noah's shoulder, and then walked downstairs and called Rachel Holt. She picked up on the second ring. I'm awake, she said, which meant she'd been awake, which meant something else had already happened that Derek wasn't yet aware of. Someone called me, he said. I think it was the third man from the alley. Rachel was quiet for a beat. Then, Derek, 40 minutes ago, someone broke into your house on Birch Street. The rose bush, the twice-erased math homework, Mrs. Alvarez's soup on the stove. Anyone hurt? His voice was completely even. No, the house was empty, but they went through everything. A pause. They left something on the kitchen table. What? A photograph, Rachel said, of Noah, at school, last week. He stood in the estate's dark kitchen with the phone against his ear, looking out at the back garden where the oak trees were black shapes against a lighter sky, and he felt something shift in him. Not panic, because panic was a luxury he'd trained out of himself years ago, but something older and quieter and in some ways worse than panic. The particular cold clarity that comes when someone has made a threat specific enough that it has a name and a face and a height of about 3.5 feet and a preference for coy named Gerald. Wake Vivian, he said, and get me Reyes's direct line. We're done waiting for them to make their next move. Rachel had the security team on full alert inside 4 minutes. Derek knew because he counted, not obsessively, but because timing matters, and his brain defaulted to measuring it, the way it had measured everything since the first week of BUD/S training, when someone had told him that the difference between a good operator and a dead one was usually seconds, and he'd believed it because he'd eventually seen it prove true enough times to stop needing proof. Vivian came downstairs in 6 minutes. She was dressed, which told him she hadn't fully slept either. Her hair was down and she had her phone in her hand, and she looked at Derek's face when she came into the kitchen and didn't ask how bad it was. She read it from him directly, which he noted, because not everyone could do that. "Rachel told me," she said. "Okay. Noah is asleep. I checked." She exhaled. "Okay." She sat at the kitchen table, set her phone down, put both hands flat on the surface like she was steadying something. Who breaks into an empty house and leaves a photograph? "Someone who wants you to know they can," Derek said. "It's a message. They're not ready to move yet, or they'd have moved. They want us scared and reactive." "Is it working?" He looked at her. "On me? No. But I'd be lying if I told you the photograph didn't." He stopped, found the honest word. "Land." She nodded. "Because it's Noah." "Because it's Noah." Agent Reyes arrived at the estate at 4:45 in the morning with Park and 2 additional agents Derek hadn't met, and the kitchen that had felt large and quiet an hour ago became a room with too many people and not enough answers. Reyes spread a thin folder on the table. Photographs of Derek's house on Birch Street, the kitchen, the table, the photograph left behind. She didn't editorialize. She walked through it the way she walked through everything: facts, sequence, what was confirmed and what was inferred. The photograph of Noah was professional, not phone quality. A lens with reach taken from outside the school fence at a distance, which meant someone had done real surveillance and had equipment. The angle and shadow suggested mid-afternoon, which Reyes cross-referenced with school dismissal times. "This was taken 8 days ago," she said, "before we had a security arrangement here." "So they had him under observation before the estate moved," Derek said. "Yes." The words sat in the room. "They wanted us to see the timestamp," Derek said. "They're telling us the surveillance preceded our countermoves. They're telling us they were ahead of us." Reyes looked at him. "That's what we think, too." "What does that say about Gale?" "It says he's not improvising." Reyes closed the folder. "We have a clearer picture of him this week. The financial forensics team has been working through the Sterling Capital records that Vivian's legal team provided. There's a pattern of money movement that goes back 14 months, well before the attempted kidnapping. He's been planning something for over a year. We think the kidnapping may have been phase 2 of something larger, which means there's a phase 3. Vivian was very still. "What would phase 3 be?" "Destabilization," Reyes said. "If Vivian Sterling disappears, Sterling Capital Group goes into crisis. The board structure has certain vulnerabilities that Gale knows about from the inside. Someone with the right financial positioning could profit substantially from that crisis." She paused. "This isn't just revenge. It never was." Derek had wondered about that in the alley, whether 3 professional operatives were disproportionate for a personal grudge. They were. This explained the disproportion. "He wants to crash the company." "And make money doing it." "Yes." Reyes looked at Vivian. "Which means taking you out of commission was always the financial play, not just the personal one." Vivian said nothing for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Not fear exactly, but the specific expression of someone who has just had their understanding of an enemy's motivation corrected significantly upward. 6 years, she said. "We built that company together." Nobody had an answer for that. Reyes moved on because there wasn't one. The conversation shifted to what they had and what they needed. The phone call Derek had received, the third man, the one from the alley, had been traced to a burner phone, disposable and already dead, but the cell tower it had pinged gave them a geographic area, a 12-square-mile radius northeast of the city. Reyes had people working it. Derek gave the call verbatim, every word cadence, the specific phrasing the man had used. "He said the boy was not part of the original arrangement," Reyes confirmed. "That's significant. He's drawing a line." "Can you find him?" Derek asked. "We're trying. A man who wants to be found can be found faster than one who doesn't. He called you voluntarily, which suggests a degree of conflict about what he's been hired to do." She gathered her folder. "That's something we can work with." By the time the agents left, it was past 6. The kitchen was quiet again. Derek made coffee for no reason except that it gave his hands something to do. Vivian was at the table, looking at nothing in particular, doing the thing he'd noticed her doing when she was working through something, very still, eyes unfocused, the external quiet that means internal noise. Say it, Derek told her. She looked up. What? Whatever you're working out. She was quiet for another moment. Then, Martin came to my office 2 months after I started the legal action. He said, she stopped. He said I was making a mistake, that I didn't understand what I was doing, and I told him I understood exactly what I was doing, which was removing someone who'd become a liability and a legal risk from a company I'd built. She looked at her hands. He looked at me and he said, "You'll regret this." And I thought it was just hurt, wounded ego, the thing people say when they're losing. You couldn't have known. I should have taken it more seriously. Vivian. He waited until she was looking at him. There's a specific kind of hindsight that isn't useful, the kind where you take what you know now and fault yourself for not knowing it earlier. You made a decision with the information you had at the time. I put you and Noah in danger. A man who was already planning to hurt you put us in danger, Derek said. That's a different sentence. She held his gaze. He could see her wanting to argue and then deciding not to. Not because he'd won, but because she was tired and she knew he was right. And arguing when you're tired and the other person is right is a waste of energy she apparently didn't have at 6 a.m. Okay, she said. Okay. She stood, took her mug to the sink, rinsed it. I need to do 2 hours of work before Noah wakes up and wants to discuss Gerald's behavioral patterns. She paused. Derek, She stopped at the edge of something, turned it over, put it down. Thank you. For last night. For being steady. It's what I know how to do, he said. Not everyone who knows how to be steady actually is, she said. There's a difference. She went to the study. He stood in the kitchen in the early morning quiet and drank his coffee and thought about the 12-square-mile radius northeast of the city and the man who'd called and the photograph and Martin Gale somewhere behind all of it, like a spider in the middle of a web that kept proving larger than anyone had estimated. He found Noah at the pond at 7:15. His son was cross-legged in the damp grass, notebook open on his knee, an actual handwritten notebook that Derek had not been aware existed, recording what appeared to be observational data about the 3 koi. What are you doing? Derek asked, though he had a reasonable idea. Tracking their activity patterns, Noah said without looking up. Gerald is most active in the morning. Rex is actually kind of lazy. Stomper, he frowned at his notebook. Stomper is unpredictable. I'm still building his profile. Derek crouched down beside him. The morning was cold and the pond was flat and silver gray, and the fish moved below the surface in their unhurried circular way. Bud, I need to tell you something. Noah looked up, the inventory taking eyes. We're going to be here a little longer than I first said, and for a while I need you to stay closer to the house. Not because I'm trying to be annoying, because I need to know where you are at all times. Noah absorbed this. Is it the unfriendly people? Yes. Are they close? Derek weighed the answer. Closer than I'd like, but you're safe here. I need you to understand both of those things at the same time. Noah looked back at the pond. Okay, he said. I'll stay closer. A pause. Can I still do the pond? Yeah, from here you can see the house, and I can see you. That works. Noah nodded. Dad? He didn't look up. Are you scared? It was the kind of question Derek had been asked before, in different contexts and different registers, and he'd given various answers depending on who was asking and why. With Noah, he had a rule, which was, don't lie, don't perform, and don't give him something he can't carry. A little, he said. Not about me. About you. Noah considered this with the careful gravity he applied to important things. I'm scared a little too, he said. But you're here. I'm here, Derek said. Then it's okay, Noah said, with a simplicity that was not naive but was the specific quiet faith of a child who had been given consistent reason for it, and Derek felt the weight of that, the full accumulated weight, in a way he didn't usually let himself. Yeah, he said. It's okay. He put his hand briefly on Noah's head. Noah leaned into it for a second, then went back to his notebook, and Derek stood and went back to the house, and that was that. The investigation moved in the second week with the particular grinding momentum of federal work. Not fast, never fast, but accumulating. Reyes called with updates that were small in isolation but were building towards something. The woman, Angela Marsh, had surfaced in Charlotte. A credit card use, brief and likely accidental. A team was on it. The financial trail connecting Gale to the foreign accounts that had funded the mercenary team had been traced through 3 shell companies and a Cayman intermediary, which was complex enough to be frustrating, but not complex enough to be unprovable. A forensic accountant from the U.S. Attorney's Office told Reyes it was one of the cleaner illegal money trails she'd seen in years, which was Gale's mistake, the kind of clean that comes from overconfidence, from believing you're smarter than the people looking. Derek worked remotely during this period, which in practice meant he spent his mornings on calls with Reyes and Rachel, and occasionally directly with Vivian's legal team, walking through tactical questions about the Foundation's security protocols. Because Vivian had, at some point in the second week, stopped asking whether he was going to take the job and simply started including him in the relevant conversations. And he had, at some point in the second week, stopped noting this and simply participated. "You know, you've basically accepted the job without saying so," Vivian told him on a Tuesday evening. They were in the study. She'd commandeered one half of the large desk for her work, and he'd claimed the other half. A territorial arrangement that had happened gradually and without explicit negotiation. Noah was asleep. The house was quiet. The security rotation outside was on its 3rd shift of the day. "I've been helpful," Derek said. "You've been doing the job." "Consulting." She gave him the look, the one she'd apparently developed specifically for when he was being deliberately dense. "Derek, I'll give you a formal answer when things settle down. I'll take that as a yes. You can take it as a strong maybe." I'm noting strong maybe in the record. He almost smiled. She caught it and did smile, briefly, before going back to whatever document she was reading. The fire in the study was low and the window was dark, and the room felt, in the way rooms sometimes do when the circumstances are serious enough, like a version of normal that couldn't quite exist outside the specific container of where they were and what was happening. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can ask." He'd been thinking about this for 2 days and not asking because it felt adjacent to a line he wasn't sure about. "Gale, the 6 years you worked together, was there ever a moment where you saw this in him? Not the criminality, but he chose the word, the capacity for it." She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. "There was a negotiation," she said finally. "A real estate deal, early days. We were trying to acquire a property, and there was a family in a long-term lease who weren't easy to move. Martin suggested—" She stopped. "He suggested we manufacture a lease violation, create documentation, just enough to give us legal cover to accelerate their departure." She looked at the fire. "I said no. And he said it wasn't a big deal. It was just business. And I said some things aren't business. And he looked at me like—" She paused. "Like I'd said something quaint, something a younger person says before they learn better." "What did you do?" "I found another property. We didn't need that one." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I told myself that was the end of it, that he'd accepted my position. But I think what I actually did was not look at it again. Because looking at it again would have meant having a conversation I wasn't ready to have about the person I'd chosen to build something with." "That's a human thing to do," Derek said. "It's a cowardly thing to do." "Sometimes they're the same thing." She looked at him. "Do you do that? Not look at things?" He thought honestly. "Yeah, less than I used to. Parenthood—" He stopped. Noah has this way of asking questions that are extremely direct. Has since he could talk. About 3 years ago, he asked me why I never called my dad. Just straight out, at breakfast. And I gave him some— He paused. "I gave him something partial, and he looked at me with this face like, that's not actually an answer. And I realized I'd been not looking at that thing for 6 years." "Did you call your dad?" "No." He said it without drama. "But I stopped pretending I had a good reason not to." Vivian looked at him for a moment, then back at the fire. "That's more honest than most people manage. Noah makes it hard to be anything else." She smiled again. The real one, the one that got out before she authorized it. He really is extraordinary. He's also currently trying to correlate Gerald's swimming speed with water temperature and has asked me to help him create a spreadsheet. He paused. I told him we could. I may have overcommitted on that. I'm excellent at spreadsheets, Vivian said. Yeah? Spent 3 years in financial modeling before I moved to operations. If Noah wants a coy behavior tracking spreadsheet, I can build him one that will genuinely tell him something. Derek looked at her. He'll take that very seriously. Good, she said. He should. The spreadsheet became, over the following 2 days, a genuine collaborative project between Vivian Sterling, who ran a multi-billion-dollar investment firm, and Noah Callahan, who was 7 and had opinions about data collection intervals. Derek watched this from the kitchen doorway one morning with his coffee and a feeling he couldn't quite categorize. Something between warmth and something more complicated. The recognition that his son was being taken seriously by an adult who didn't have to and was doing it because she wanted to. It was on the 11th day at the estate that Reyes called at 2 in the afternoon with a different quality in her voice. Not urgent in the emergency sense, but charged. Derek took the call in the hallway. Angela Marsh is in custody, Reyes said. Charlotte PD picked her up this morning. She's talking. How much? Enough. She was low-level in the operation. She passed calendar information and access codes. That's the extent of her direct involvement. But she knows things. Conversation she overheard, a meeting she was present for. Reyes paused. She says Gail met personally with the man who assembled the team. She can describe the meeting. She can potentially place Gail in direct contact with the operation. That's enough for an arrest? We're building to it. The U.S. attorney wants the full picture before we move because Gail has resources and lawyers who will look for every gap. Another pause. But Derek, we're close. This is moving. He told Vivian. She was at her desk and she listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she said, How close? Reyes didn't give me a timeline, but close. She nodded, put her pen down. I want to testify, she said. When it gets to that point, I want to be in that room. I know. I don't want to be the person who got rescued and then... She stopped. I want to be the person who helped dismantle it. You will be, Derek said. You've given them everything, the financial records, the communications, the access to your whole corporate structure. That's not a passive role. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. But it is. She looked at him. He was standing in the doorway of the study with the afternoon light behind him, which put his face slightly in shadow, and she was aware, had been increasingly aware over 11 days in close quarters, that this was a man who said exactly what he meant and meant it precisely as much as he said it, no more and no less, which was rarer than people who hadn't spent time in corporate environments could appreciate. Derek, her voice was quieter. When this is over, he said, I'll give you the formal answer on the job. She exhaled. That's not what I was going to say. He waited. I was going to say... She stopped, recalibrated. I don't know exactly what I was going to say. Never mind. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. Okay. He went back to the kitchen. He knew what she'd been going to say, roughly, or at least the category of thing it was. And he also knew that the middle of a federal investigation with an active threat and a 7-year-old in the next room was not the time or place. He knew this in the same clear-eyed way he knew most things. Not coldly, but practically, because Derek Callahan had long understood that the right thing at the wrong moment was still the wrong move. The 13th day. He was doing a perimeter walk at 10 in the morning, not because Rachel's team couldn't do it, but because his body needed the motion, when his phone rang and the screen showed a number he'd stored under a name he'd made up. The third call had come in on a different burner, but Reyes had told him to store any contact from this person. He stopped walking and answered. You're still there, the man said. Not a question. I'm still here, Derek said. I have something. The voice was careful, measuring each word. Information about what Gail plans next. The timing. Derek's hand tightened on the phone by 1 degree. Why are you giving me this? because the child is involved now, and that was not a pause that carried something in it. Not quite guilt, but the specific weight of a professional line crossed. That was not my arrangement. I do not work that way. You understand I'll pass this to the FBI. I understand that is acceptable. I am... Another pause. I am done with this contract. I want it finished. Give me the information. The man talked for 4 minutes. Derek listened without interrupting. What he described was specific. A timeline, a target window, an approach that Gail had apparently approved in a communication the man had been partially present for. Gail had hired a second team, smaller, 2 men. Their instruction was not abduction this time. Derek was very still. He changed the objective, the man said. When? After the first attempt failed, after you were identified. A pause. He is not trying to move her now. He wants to remove the problem. Both problems. Both. Derek and Vivian. Timeline, Derek said, 72 hours from yesterday, which means 59 hours, Derek said. Yes. How do I know this is accurate? You don't, the man said, but I called you once before with something true, and I am calling you now with something I have no reason to invent. A final pause. The child was the line. Your boy. I have children. I would not... He stopped. Whatever he was going to say, he didn't say it. Be careful. The call ended. Derek stood in the cold on the estate grounds for exactly 4 seconds. Then he called Reyes. 59 hours was the phrase that transformed the pace of everything. Reyes was on with her supervisor before Derek finished the call. Rachel had the estate security briefed within the hour, bringing in additional personnel, running new protocols, eliminating what she called soft spots in the coverage, places in the perimeter where a disciplined 2-person team could theoretically exploit a gap. Derek walked the perimeter with her and was useful in the way she was coming to expect from him, which is to say he saw things she'd already seen and a few she hadn't, and said nothing extraneous about any of it. Vivian was told directly and completely because that was the agreement and Derek kept agreements. She listened. She did not fall apart, which he'd stopped expecting her to do, while simultaneously noting that her version of not falling apart cost her something. He could see it in the line of her jaw and the way she breathed through the information. 59 hours, she said. Approximately. We're treating it as an outer limit. And the FBI is moving on Gail today. The Angela Marsh testimony plus what I just gave them should be enough to move. Reyes is confident. But the second team is already contracted and in motion, which means arresting Gail doesn't automatically stop them. Rachel knows this. We're treating both problems as parallel. Vivian nodded. What do you need from me? I need you to stay inside today. I need you to do exactly what Rachel tells you, when she tells you, and I need you to trust that the people around you know what they're doing. She looked at him. Do I trust you? Yes. Then I trust the people you vouch for. She said it simply. Okay. Noah was harder, not because he resisted. He didn't. He had the practical adaptability of a child who'd been given honest information and a father who'd never broken a promise. But because Derek had to tell him something that was true without telling him everything that was true, which required a precision he found genuinely difficult. We need to stay inside today, Derek told him at the kitchen table. All day. Inside. Noah looked at him. Is it really bad right now? It's the most serious it's been, Derek said. But there are a lot of people working to fix it, and we are in the safest place we can be. Can Vivian stay with us? Yes. Noah processed. Can we do the spreadsheet? Yeah, we can do the spreadsheet. Okay. He picked up his fork and went back to his breakfast. Then, without looking up, Dad, you'll stay inside too, right? You won't go outside. Derek paused 1 beat. I'll be where I need to be, he said carefully. Noah looked up. He read the pause. He was 7, and he read the pause. That's not the same as inside. No, Derek admitted. It's not. Noah put his fork down. He looked at his plate for a moment, and when he looked back up, his face had the particular expression Derek had seen on it approximately twice before. Not childish fear, but something older and more complicated. The expression of a kid who has understood something he would have preferred not to understand quite yet. "You have to help them," he said. "If I need to." "Yes." "Because that's what you do." "Yeah, bud. That's what I do." Noah picked his fork back up. His jaw was set in a way that looked familiar in a way Derek didn't entirely like. Familiar because it was the same set he felt in his own jaw on days when he was carrying something. "Okay," Noah said. "Just come back." "I will." "Every single time." "Every single time," Derek said. And he meant it with everything he had, which was the best he could offer and not quite the guarantee his son deserved, and they both knew it, and they ate breakfast anyway. The arrest of Martin Gale happened at 4:17 in the afternoon, a coordinated federal operation involving agents at his home, his office, and a hotel suite he'd apparently been using as a secondary workspace. Reyes texted Derek 3 words. "He's in custody." Vivian read it over Derek's shoulder and said nothing for a moment, and then said, "That's not enough yet." "No," he agreed, "but it's something." The second team, the 2-man unit Gale had contracted, was the remaining variable. 59 hours from the third man's call had become something closer to 36. Reyes had the profile of both men from intelligence sources that Derek wasn't fully read in on but trusted because Reyes had earned that trust over 2 weeks of consistent accuracy. One of the two was known, the other was a question mark. At 11 that night, while Noah slept and Vivian worked with the kind of focused intensity that Derek recognized as a coping mechanism, the same one he used, the channeling of anxiety into productivity, the belief that if you're working, you're not losing ground, Rachel knocked on the study door and said, "We have a location." The 2 men had taken a house 3 miles from the estate, a rental. They'd paid cash through an intermediary. A neighbor had called in a noise complaint, something mundane, an argument about parking, nothing related, and a local deputy had run the plates on a car parked outside and hit a flag that the FBI had placed on rental vehicles in a 12-county radius. Reyes wanted Derek on a call immediately. She walked him through the tactical picture. Federal agents were staging. They had the house under surveillance. The 2 men had been confirmed inside approximately 90 minutes ago. "We move at 4 a.m., Reyes said. "We want to give you the picture because your team needs to be on heightened alert until we confirm both men are in custody." "Understood," Derek said. He told Rachel. She nodded once and went to brief her team. He stood in the hallway for a moment and then went to the study, and Vivian looked up from her laptop and saw his face. "Something's happening," she said. "Something's being handled," he said. "Tonight." She held his gaze. "Are you involved?" "I'm here," he said. "That's where I'm needed." She absorbed this. "Is that the truth? Or is that what you're telling me so I don't worry?" "Both," he said honestly. "But the second one's based on the first." She looked at him for a long moment. The fire had burned lower. The house was very quiet. The security team outside invisible but present. The world outside the windows dark and cold and containing whatever it contained. "Derek," she said, and stopped. "Yeah," he said. "I know this probably isn't the She stopped again. "I know," he said. She looked at him. "You don't know what I was going to say. I have a reasonable idea." She was quiet for a moment. "Is it—" She stopped a third time, which for Vivian Sterling, who chose words with the precision of someone who'd spent 30 years choosing them carefully, meant she was in territory she hadn't fully mapped. "Is it strange that I feel safer with you here than I've felt in a long time? Not because of the security, because of specifically you." He didn't answer immediately, not because he didn't have an answer, but because the answer deserved the right words rather than the fast ones. "No," he said finally. "It's not strange." "Okay." She looked at her laptop, then back at him. "Okay." He went to the kitchen, poured water, stood at the window looking at the dark shape of the oak trees. At 4:12 in the morning, his phone lit with Reyes's name. He answered before it fully rang. "Both in custody," she said. "No shots fired. It's done." He exhaled. The first full exhale he'd taken in 36 hours, or so it felt. "Injuries?" "One agent with a minor laceration. That's it." A pause. Derek, it's done. You can tell her. He walked to the study. Vivian was still at her desk. He didn't know if she'd slept or simply hadn't tried. She looked up when he came in, and she read the answer from his face before he spoke. Both in custody, he said. Reyes just called. Vivian put both hands flat on the desk. She looked at them for a moment. Then she said, Noah? Asleep. She nodded. She pressed her lips together and looked at the desk, and when she looked back up, her eyes were slightly bright, which she blinked away with the efficiency of someone who has learned to process things quickly and privately. That's good, she said. That's... She stopped. I'm not going to cry. You can. I'm not going to. She stood, pulled herself straight. Is Gail? In federal custody, not going anywhere. She nodded again. Then she crossed the room and stood in front of him and looked at him very directly, the way she had in the alley. That same trying to understand expression. Then she put one hand against his chest, briefly, flat-palmed, not a hug, but something deliberate. He stayed still. Thank you, she said. Not in the way people say it when they mean, I appreciate your service. In the way people say it when they mean something they don't have a better word for. Yeah, he said. She dropped her hand. Get some sleep. You too. She went upstairs. Derek stood in the quiet study for a moment, looking at the low fire, then turned off the desk lamp and went to check on Noah one more time, the way he did every night without exception. Not out of anxiety, but out of the particular habit of a man who understands that some things are worth the extra 30 seconds. Noah was asleep. The 47 dinosaurs were distributed across the windowsill and nightstand and the corner shelf where Noah had organized them upon arrival with the focused care of someone establishing a territory. Gerald, Rex, and Stomper were presumably in the pond outside, doing whatever fish do at 4 in the morning. Derek pulled the comforter straight, turned off the hallway light, walked to his own room and sat on the edge of the bed and let the quiet of the house settle around him. Real quiet. Not the held breath kind, but the kind that comes when the thing you've been bracing for has passed, and the body slowly starts remembering that it can stand down. He lay back, looked at the ceiling, thought about nothing specific for probably the first time in 2 weeks. His side had mostly stopped hurting. His arm was almost healed. His house on Birch Street was going to need some work after the break-in, and he had the thought clearly and practically as a thing to address rather than as a weight. Outside, the oak trees were black shapes against a sky that was, very slowly, starting to lighten at the edges. He watched it for a while. Then he closed his eyes, and for the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, he slept without counting anything at all. He woke at 7, which was later than he'd slept in months. The house was quiet in a way that had a different texture from the previous 2 weeks. Not the held breath quiet of waiting, but something looser and more ordinary. The quiet of a morning that didn't have a threat count running underneath it. He lay still for a moment and registered the difference and let it be real before he got up. Noah was already at the kitchen table with his notebook open, recording what Derek assumed was overnight koi activity data extrapolated from morning observations, because Noah had apparently decided that gaps in the data record were unacceptable and had developed a methodology for bridging them. He looked up when Derek came in. Gerald was very active this morning, he reported, like, unusually. Derek started the coffee. I think it's the temperature change. The water gets colder overnight, and then when the sun hits it, there's this transition period where Vivian said it's called thermal stratification. She explained it, and I'm going to add it to the spreadsheet as a variable. Derek looked at his son. You talked to Vivian already? She was up at 6. She said she slept better than she has in a long time. Noah paused. She looked like it. Derek poured his coffee. Noah. Yeah, it's over. The people. The situation. It's resolved. Noah went still. Then, we can go home? We can go home. His son closed the notebook very carefully, like he was giving himself a moment to feel the whole of the sentence. Then he looked up and his face had that thing on it. The thing Derek almost never saw, because Noah was not a demonstrative kid, had not been since toddlerhood, had always processed things internally first and expressed them second. The open, unguarded version of his face, the one without the careful inventory-taking layer. Okay, Noah said. His voice was a little rough. Okay, Derek said. They looked at each other across the kitchen for a second. Then Noah said, "Can I tell the fish goodbye?" "Yeah," Derek said. "Take your time." He watched his son pull on his jacket with the focused efficiency that was entirely characteristic and walk out to the pond, notebook tucked under his arm, and crouched down at the edge of the water. Derek stood at the kitchen window with his coffee and watched him and thought about the photograph left on the kitchen table on Birch Street, the specific targeted malice of that image, and felt the residue of it. Not fear anymore, but its aftermath, the particular exhaustion that comes after sustained alertness finally releases. He was glad it was over. He was glad in a physical, cellular way that he rarely acknowledged, because acknowledging it required admitting how much it had cost. Vivian came into the kitchen at 7:45. She was dressed for work, actually dressed, blazer, the composed professional version, which struck Derek as both completely consistent and slightly jarring given the last 2 weeks of kitchen table mornings. She looked at him, then at the window, at Noah by the pond. "You told him," she said. "This morning." "How did he take it?" "He wanted to say goodbye to the fish." She stood beside him at the window. Outside, Noah appeared to be engaged in what was either a farewell conversation with Gerald or a final data collection session, possibly both, knowing Noah. "He's going to miss them," she said. "He'll pivot, he always does." Derek paused. "Thank you for the spreadsheet. He's going to be working on that data for weeks." "He built most of it," she said. "I just gave him the framework." She watched Noah for a moment. "Derek, last night, what I said, I want you to know I wasn't—" She stopped. "I'm not a person who says things in crisis and then walks them back. But I also don't want you to feel I don't feel anything you need to manage," he said. "You said something true. I heard it." She looked at him. "That's it?" "That's it." She was quiet for a moment. He could see her running through whether to push further and deciding correctly that it didn't need pushing. "Okay," she said. "We should probably talk about the job," he said. "Before we leave here, I have an answer." She turned to look at him more fully. "Now?" "Now's fine." She set her coffee down. "Okay, I'll take it," he said, "on 2 conditions. Which are: 1, I need enough flexibility in the schedule that Noah's routine stays consistent. I'm not going back to 2 jobs and an alarm at 5:15, but I'm also not going back to a situation where my kid's schedule is secondary to everything else." "That's not a condition," Vivian said. "That's a baseline, of course." 2, I run the programs the way I think they should be run. I'll report to you, I'll work within the structure, I'll take your input seriously, but I need to be able to make calls in the field without committee approval. She considered this for 2 seconds. "That's also not a condition. That's why I wanted you specifically." She paused. "Is that really it?" "That's really it." She extended her hand. He shook it. She held on a moment longer than a standard handshake. "Welcome to the Sterling Public Safety Foundation," she said. "I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing," he said. "You'll figure it out. I'll help." "I know you will." They drove back to Raleigh that afternoon, Derek's car with Noah, who had produced a hand-drawn farewell card for the koi that he'd left propped against the side of the pond, which Derek had not commented on and would not comment on for the rest of his life. Rachel's team followed at a distance. Vivian drove separately, heading to her office, because the 2 weeks away from in-person operations had created a backlog she was visibly eager to address. Birch Street looked the same from the outside, which Derek had not quite expected. The rosebush was still there, brown and dormant now, late October having arrived while they were gone, but structurally intact. The gutters on the porch needed clearing. The light above the garage door had been out for 3 weeks and remained out. He had the locks rekeyed before they went inside. A locksmith he'd called from the estate, prearranged, met them there. Noah waited in the car with a book, unprotesting, because he'd been told about the break-in in the sanitized but truthful version Derek had given him and had received it with the gravity it deserved. The inside had been set to rights by a cleaning service Rachel had arranged. Derek had initially resisted this, then accepted it, because some things are worth accepting when someone means them well, and the alternative is scrubbing fingerprint dust out of his kitchen by himself. Noah's homework was still on the table, undisturbed. The math, the twice-erased 11, Gerald DeCoy's drawing in the margin. The house felt not violated anymore, but itself again, the particular accumulation of small, ordinary things that makes a space a home. Socks on the couch, Noah's crayons, the 3-inch dinosaur sentinel on top of the television. Noah came in behind him, dragging his bags, and stopped in the middle of the living room and looked around with the expression of someone checking inventory. Then he said, "Mr. Stomper is still there." He pointed at the television dinosaur. He'd apparently named that one too, separately from the pond koi, which Derek had not known. "He is," Derek confirmed. "Good." Noah dragged his bags toward his room. "I'm going to unpack, and then can we have Mrs. Alvarez's soup? She said she'd make more." Derek had texted Mrs. Alvarez from the car. She'd responded in 4 seconds that she'd been ready for 2 days. "She's bringing it over at 6, he said. "Perfect." Noah disappeared into his room. Derek heard the sound of bags being opened, the particular clatter of 47 dinosaurs being redistributed to their correct locations by a child who remembered exactly where each one went. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. The water heater had been replaced while they were gone. Also Rachel's arrangement, and this time Derek had not protested because the heater had moved from theoretical threat to certain failure in the week before the estate, and there was no version of his pride worth a cold shower for Noah. He ran the tap, and the water came out hot, which was a small and specific satisfaction. He called Reyes that evening, not for information, but because she deserved to hear from him directly. "We're home," he said. "Good," she said. "How's your side?" "Healed, mostly. The scar's going to be a conversation piece. I'll manage." "Derek." She paused. "For what it's worth, you were a significant part of why this moved the way it did. The call you took at 2 a.m., the information you pulled out of that source, the perimeter work at the estate. You were an asset to this investigation." He didn't know what to do with that beyond receive it, so he said, "Thank you, Reyes." "Are you staying involved with the Sterling situation?" "I'm running her foundation." A pause. "The Public Safety Foundation?" "Yes." Something in her voice was considering. "That could be useful. If you ever want to discuss collaboration with federal programs, officially through proper channels, I'll call you," he said. "Please do." Another pause. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Callahan." "You too, Agent Reyes." He hung up. Noah had come to the doorway at some point during the call and was leaning against the frame eating an apple, listening with the transparent eavesdropping technique of a child who believes that standing still constitutes invisibility. Derek looked at him. Noah took a bite of his apple. "Everything okay?" Noah asked, performing casual. "Everything's okay." "Was that the FBI lady?" "Yes." "Is she nice?" Derek thought about Reyes, so the direct questions at the diner, the black coffee, the way she'd walk through the photograph of Noah's school with careful professional detachment while her eyes communicated something else. "Yeah," he said. "She's good at her job, and that makes her feel nice even when she's not trying to be." Noah considered this as a category of person. "Like you," he said. Derek looked at him. "I wasn't trying to be a compliment to myself." "I know," Noah said. "I was." He pushed off the doorframe and went back to his room. Mrs. Alvarez came at 6 with soup and also, unexpectedly, her husband Ramon, who almost never came, and who shook Derek's hand with both of his and said, "We were worried," in his quiet way that made the 4 words carry more than 4 words usually carry. They ate at the kitchen table, all 4 of them, and Noah told Ramon about Gerald and Stomper and Rex with the comprehensive authority of a genuine expert, and Ramon asked questions with the patient curiosity of a man who understood that a child's serious interest deserved serious engagement, and Mrs. Alvarez and Derek did the quiet, logistical debrief of people who trust each other enough to sort things without drama. "The school called," Mrs. Alvarez said. "Twice. I told them there was a family emergency and you'd call when you could." "I'll call tomorrow," Derek said. "The hamster is fine. Mrs. Kim has been managing the monitoring duties." "Noah will want to debrief her." I assumed. She looked at him across the table, the particular measuring look that she reserved for moments when she was deciding whether to say the harder thing. And you? Not just fine. Actually. He thought about it. Actually fine, he said. More or less. More or less is honest. She refilled his water without asking. What comes next? New job, he said. Running a foundation, community safety work. She set the pitcher down, looked at him. Running. Yeah. So you'll be... She gestured vaguely at the concept of an office. More or less. She made the sound that was not quite agreement. You'll be bad at sitting still. Probably, he admitted. But the work is real. I've looked at the programs. There's something to build. She nodded slowly. And the woman, Vivian Sterling. He looked at her. She's my employer. I know what she is. The measuring look continued. I'm asking what else she is. Mrs. Alvarez, you can tell me to mind my business. I would never. You'd like to, though. He looked at his water glass. She's... He stopped, found the accurate version. She's someone I respect. I don't know yet what else. Mrs. Alvarez made a different sound, this one in a register that suggested she found I don't know yet to be a more informative answer than he'd intended it to be. Okay, she said, and changed the subject. And Derek was grateful for it. The first day at the foundation offices was disorienting in a way Derek had expected, but not quite in the way he'd expected. He'd anticipated the strangeness of an office environment after 2 years of physical work. He'd anticipated the learning curve of organizational structure. What he hadn't anticipated was walking into a space where 12 people, staff and early volunteers, looked up at him with the specific expression of people who have read about someone and are now calibrating that reading against the actual human in front of them, and finding that the calibration went in both directions. They'd expected someone more. He wasn't sure. Military in a visible way. He wasn't that. He was 32 with a healing scar and a coffee from the gas station because he hadn't located a decent coffee place near the office yet, and he introduced himself by sitting down with each person individually and asking what they were working on and listening without interrupting. By noon, 2 of them had come back to him with ideas they'd apparently been holding for weeks, waiting for someone to present them to. Vivian stopped by the office at 2 that afternoon. Not for show. She came in the back entrance, no announcement, dressed like someone who was between meetings and had 15 minutes. She stood in the doorway of what was technically Derek's office and looked at the space, his jacket on the back of the chair, the yellow legal pad on the desk covered in his handwriting, the site map of 3 community areas he'd pinned to the wall, the gas station coffee cup. You're already rearranging things, she said. The layout was set up for a traditional executive. I'm not going to be in this room enough to justify the size. He paused. I'd like to convert the back half into a training area. Done. She came in, looked at the map. Which areas? The Morningside District has 3 neighborhood watch programs that aren't coordinating with each other. They're doing redundant work and missing gaps because nobody has given them a unified structure. He tapped the map. Eastfield has a volunteer emergency response team that's been doing everything right for 4 years with no resources and no formal recognition. If we certify them and equip them, they become a model. He paused. And the Carmichael Corridor says that's where I'd start. It has the most concentrated need and the least existing infrastructure. If we get one thing right there, it shows the concept works. Vivian was looking at the map. You've been doing this since we got back. I've been doing it since you described the foundation at the conference room table, he said. I had time at the estate. She looked at him. You were planning the foundation while we were under active threat. I plan when I'm waiting. It's a habit. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the map, and he could see her doing the thing she did, the still external, loud internal processing. The Carmichael Corridor has been a gap for 15 years, she said. Every city initiative has stalled there. Why do you think we won't? Because city initiatives come from outside and look like programs. What I want to build comes from inside and looks like people helping each other. He paused. It's slower and harder, and you can't ribbon cut it as easily. But it holds. She looked at him. How do you know? Because I've seen what happens when communities decide they're responsible for each other. I've seen it in places with a lot less than Carmichael has. He held her gaze. I'm right about this. I know you are, she said. That's why you're here. She stepped back, checked her phone. I have to get back, but she paused at the doorway. Derek, you look right in this space. He looked at the yellow legal pad, the map, the gas station coffee. It needs work. Yes, she said, but so did you, and you're still here. He wasn't entirely sure how to take that, but she was already out the door, and he went back to the map. The weeks that followed were not tidy. He hadn't expected them to be. Building the Carmichael program meant attending 3 consecutive neighborhood meetings in a church fellowship hall where a rotating cast of skeptical residents, people who had watched initiatives come and go for a generation and had excellent reasons for their skepticism, asked him direct questions in the direct way of people who had stopped softening their questions because softening them had never changed the answers. He answered straight. He didn't have all the answers, and he said so and gave them the ones he had. He came back the following week, and the week after. On the 4th week, a woman named Diane Patterson, who'd been the most pointed questioner at the first 3 meetings, and who ran a community garden on the east end of Carmichael with the organized precision of someone who knew that organizations survive on systems, brought him a list. It was handwritten, 12 items, community needs ranked by urgency, with specific suggestions and the names of people already doing informal versions of each. She put it on the table in front of him. This is what actually matters, she said. In order. He read it. 3 of these I can move on in the next 60 days, he said. 4 more within the quarter. The rest will take longer, but I can give you a timeline. She looked at him. You're not going to tell me you'll consider it. I just did consider it. 60 days, the quarter, timeline on the rest. She sat back. Nobody has ever said that to me. They should have. She looked at the list and then at him, and then she said, Okay, Mr. Callahan, let's talk about number 1. They talked for 2 hours. He came back the following week with a draft framework for items 1 through 3. Diane had brought 2 additional people, a retired paramedic named Vic, who wanted to help with the emergency response training, and a 23-year-old named Marcus, who'd been running an informal youth safety program out of his apartment for 8 months on $0, and who looked at Derek with the specific expression of someone who has been doing important work in total obscurity and is not quite willing to believe that's about to change. Marcus, Derek said, how many kids are in your program? Right now, about 32. He said it carefully, like he expected someone to challenge the number. Ages 11 to 17. We do twice weekly sessions at the rec center. I pay for the space myself. How much? 40 a session, 80 a week. Derek wrote it down. That stops next month. We'll cover the space and add equipment. What do you need? Marcus stared at him. He stopped, started again. I have a list. I figured, let me see it. Marcus pulled out his phone. The list was in his notes app, titled Dream List, LOL, which Derek read and did not comment on. He scrolled through it. Some of it was immediately doable. Some required planning. All of it was reasonable. This is a good list, Derek said. It's a wish list, Marcus said. I called it a dream list because I know why you called it that, Derek said. But it's a good list. We'll work through it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Why? He said, not challenging, genuinely asking. Why does a foundation run by a billionaire care about 32 kids in the Carmichael corridor? Derek set the phone down. Because 32 kids is 32 kids. And because the people in this room have been doing this work for years without resources, which means you know exactly what the work actually needs. That's the rarest thing in this field. Marcus looked at him for a long time. Then he said, okay, in the way people say okay when they mean something much bigger than the word. Vic the paramedic leaned over to Diane and said, loud enough for Derek to hear, where was this guy 10 years ago? Working on it, Derek said. The trial of Martin Gale began in February. Derek was called as a witness, the primary civilian witness, Reyes had explained, which meant he'd be on the stand for somewhere between 2 hours and a full day, depending on how the defense approached cross-examination. He prepared with the U.S. Attorney's team 3 times in the weeks before, which was mostly unnecessary because he had the relevant facts in precise order and didn't embellish and couldn't be rattled. But the preparation was procedurally required, and he complied. Noah asked about the trial with the directness that characterized his engagement with everything. Are you going to tell them what happened? Yes? All of it? Including the knife? All of it. Noah thought about this. Are you nervous? No? You should tell them about how you saw the lady in the hotel lobby before it happened, Noah said. That part is important. I will. And how you didn't walk away even though you could have. Derek looked at his son. The lawyers will ask about that. Make sure you explain it the right way, Noah said. Not like a hero thing, like the right reason. He held his son's gaze. What's the right reason? Noah gave him the look that was slightly exasperated in the way of a child who feels he has been very clear. Because she needed help and you were there, he said. That's all. The way you said it to the FBI lady. Derek nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. That's the right reason. He took the stand on a Tuesday morning in a federal courthouse in Raleigh, in a room full of people and the specific formal weight of official proceedings, and he answered every question the prosecutor asked, and then the questions the defense asked. And when the defense attorney, a tall man in a good suit who had spent 25 years finding the angles in testimonies like finding gaps in perimeter walls, tried to suggest that Derek's account was imprecise or motivated, Derek answered without effect and without retreat. He stated what he'd seen, what he'd heard, what he'd done, and the order in which all three had occurred, and when the attorney asked him why he'd intervened, he said, because someone needed help and I was there. And he said it in the flat, uncomplicated way of someone who has only one answer because it's the only one that's true. And the attorney looked at him for a long moment and moved to his next question because there was nowhere to go with a man who is simply telling what happened. Vivian testified the following week. Derek was in the courtroom. She was composed on the stand in the way she was composed at everything. The professional exterior, the measured voice, the careful word selection. And then the prosecutor asked her to describe what she had thought in the alley in the 90 seconds before Derek came around the corner. And she said, I thought this is how it ends. And I thought about the company. And then I thought about the people who work for me. And then I didn't think anything useful at all. I was afraid. And then someone said, hey, and everything changed. Derek was looking at his hands in the courtroom gallery when she said that. He looked up. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the prosecutor, answering a follow-up. But Rachel, who was 2 seats to Derek's left, glanced at him briefly and then back at the front of the room, and he looked back at his hands. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder for hire, financial fraud. Martingale received the verdict with the stillness of a man who had known it was coming and had spent 2 days deciding how he was going to receive it, which was at least consistent with what Vivian had described of him. The man who always decided in advance how he was going to appear. Derek was outside the courthouse on the steps when the verdict was announced, having declined to watch the actual reading because he'd been in enough rooms where verdicts happened and knew that the room itself was not the important part. Reyes found him there. She looked satisfied, which was not an expression she wore often in his experience. All counts, she said. Yeah. Sentencing in 6 weeks. Federal guidelines. He'll be gone for a long time. Good. She stood beside him on the courthouse steps, both of them looking out at the street. You know the third man from the alley, she said. The one who called you. Yeah. He cooperated with the investigation, provided detailed information on Gail's network that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise. She paused. The U.S. Attorney's Office is considering the extent of that cooperation in terms of what we pursue. Derek said nothing. I'm not asking your opinion, Reyes said. I'm just telling you because you're part of this and you deserve the full picture. He thought about the call at 2 a.m, the 4 words, I have children. The line the man had drawn between what he'd done and what he wouldn't do. He drew a line, Derek said. In the end, he did. That matters. I know. Reyes looked at him. It doesn't erase the rest. No, Derek agreed. It doesn't erase it, but it still matters. She nodded. They stood there another moment. Then Reyes said, The foundation. I looked at what you're building in the Carmichael corridor, the program structure. Carmichael, Derek corrected. Right, I've seen a lot of community programs in my career. She paused. Most of them are designed to look good to whoever is funding them. Yours looks like it's designed to work. That's the plan. It's a good plan. She held out her hand. He shook it. Take care of yourself, Derek. You too, Reyes. She went back inside. He stood on the steps a little longer. Vivian came out 10 minutes later with her attorney and Rachel and 2 people from her legal team, and the group paused at the top of the steps for the logistical conversation that follows the end of large complex things. What needs to happen next, who calls whom, what the board needs to be told, and when. Derek waited. When the group dispersed, Vivian walked over to him. She looked tired. Not the brittle tired of someone running on insufficient sleep, but the deep tired of someone who has been carrying something for a long time and has just put it down and is feeling both the relief and the full weight of it at the same time. It's over, she said. It's over. She looked at the street, at the ordinary traffic and the ordinary afternoon and the ordinary city that had been the backdrop to everything that had happened over the past 3 months and was now simply itself again. I keep waiting for something to feel different, she said, like a big feeling that matches the size of the thing. It doesn't come like that, Derek said. It comes in small pieces. Over time. She looked at him. Is that from experience? Yeah. From the Navy? From different things, he paused. When I got out, when I drove away from the base for the last time with Noah asleep in the back seat and no real plan, I kept waiting for some feeling that matched the size of what I'd left. It didn't come that day. It came in pieces. Months later. Still comes sometimes. She was looking at him with the trying to understand expression. Do you regret it? Getting out? Not for a second. Even with everything it cost? He thought about 515 alarms in the warehouse and the stitches in his side and the photograph on the kitchen table. He thought about Noah's math homework with the twice-erased 11 and the rose bush that was somehow alive and the 47 dinosaurs and Mrs. Alvarez's soup. No, he said. The cost was the cost. The result is Noah. She was quiet for a moment. I want to ask you something, she said, and I need you to give me an honest answer, not a careful one. I'll try. She looked at him directly. The hand on your chest. In the study that night, after the arrests, I said thank you, and I meant it, but it was also... She stopped. It was more than thank you, and I want to know if I was the only one who felt that. The courthouse steps, the ordinary afternoon, Reyes had gone back inside. The legal team had dispersed. Rachel was a discreet 40 feet away, looking at her phone with the focused attention of a professional who was giving 2 people space. No, Derek said. You weren't the only one. She held his gaze. Okay, she said. I just needed to know. I know. He paused. This is a complicated situation. Everything worth anything is complicated, she said. I have a 7-year-old. I'm aware. He's one of my favorite people. You have a company and a crisis you're just coming out of. I'm aware of that too. He looked at her. I'm not good at... He stopped. I'm better at knowing what I'm doing than figuring out what comes next. Nobody's good at figuring out what comes next, she said. We just go. He nodded slowly. Then we go. Something in her face settled. Not the full authorization smile, not the controlled professional expression, but something in between, something honest and slightly uncertain in the way that honest things usually are. Okay, she said. Then we go. They walked down the courthouse steps together, not quite touching, Rachel falling in at the appropriate professional distance behind them. And the afternoon light was doing the particular thing it does in early February when the angle is low and the air is clear, and everything looks slightly more itself than usual, sharp-edged and real. Derek put his collar up against the cold. Vivian adjusted the strap of her bag. I have a 4 o'clock, she said. I have a meeting with Marcus and Carmichael at 3:30, he said. He finished the first month's data on the youth program. How's it looking? He gained 9 kids in 4 weeks, Derek said, and 2 parents have asked to get involved. She stopped walking for half a step. 2 parents. Yeah. That's, she recalibrated. That's actually significant. I know. He paused. Marcus named the program, by the way. Officially. What did he call it? Derek looked at the street. Safe ground, he said. He said he wanted something that meant what it meant. Vivian was quiet for a moment. It does, she said. It means exactly what it means. They reached the corner where their cars were in different directions. She looked at him. He looked at her. The city moved around them the way cities do, indifferent and continuous, carrying everyone's ordinary afternoon in all directions at once. I'll see you Thursday, he said. Thursday was the weekly foundation check-in. Thursday, she confirmed. And Derek, she paused. Thank you, still, for all of it. You keep thanking me, he said. You keep being worth thanking. He didn't have an answer for that, so he nodded and they went their separate ways, and he drove to Carmichael with the heater running and the radio on something low that he wasn't fully listening to, thinking about Marcus's data and Diane's list and the 12 people in the foundation office and what the Eastfield volunteer team needed in terms of equipment certification. And underneath all of it, threaded through like something that had been there a while and was only now being acknowledged, the thought of Vivian Sterling at the corner saying, "Then we go," and meaning it. He pulled up to the rec center at 3:28. Marcus was already outside, holding a folder and a large coffee, doing the particular restless shuffling of someone who has been looking forward to a meeting. He saw Derek's car and straightened up. Derek got out. "You're early," he said. "I'm always early when I have good data," Marcus said. He held up the folder. "I added a visualization. Diane helped." "Let's see it." They went inside. The rec center was warm and smelled like old wood and something institutional, and the room Marcus used was small and had fluorescent lights that flickered slightly and metal folding chairs that Derek made a note to replace. Marcus spread the data on the table. Handwritten charts, a hand-drawn graph that was genuinely clear, 9 weeks of information about 32, now 41 kids who came twice a week to learn something that Marcus called safety and community, and that was underneath the label simply the knowledge that someone was paying attention and that showing up mattered. "Tell me about the 9 new ones," Derek said. Marcus told him. He knew each name, each situation, each reason the kid had started coming. He talked about them with the specific investment of someone who understood that the data was people and didn't let himself forget it while he was collecting it. Derek listened and took notes on his yellow legal pad and asked questions, and the afternoon went. At 5 o'clock, Derek picked up Noah from Mrs. Alvarez's. His son came down the porch steps with his backpack and his jacket, and the particular energy of a kid who has had a full day and is ready to debrief it at length. "Dad," Noah said, getting in the car. "Something happened with the hamster." "Good something or bad something?" "Complicated something." He buckled his seatbelt. "So, you know how I set up the remote monitoring protocol with Mrs. Kim?" Derek started the car. "I remember." "Well," Noah launched into it. It was a long story involving the hamster, a misunderstanding about exercise wheel schedules, and a resolution that apparently involved a written agreement between Noah and Mrs. Kim about monitoring responsibilities going forward. It was thoroughly, completely about a hamster. It had nothing to do with knife wounds, or federal investigations, or photographs left on kitchen tables. It was exactly the kind of story that a 7-year-old tells a parent at the end of a Tuesday, and Derek listened to every word of it. He drove home through the early dark, the streetlights coming on, the city settling into its evening self, and his son talked about the hamster and the protocol and the written agreement, and Derek thought, this is it. This is the whole thing. Not the alley, not the verdict, not the courthouse steps. This. The ordinary evening. The specific small voice of this specific small person working out the serious concerns of his particular life. He pulled into Birch Street. The rosebush was still there, dormant but not dead, waiting for spring with the patience of things that don't know they're waiting. The light above the garage was fixed now. He'd done it himself on a Saturday 2 weeks ago, Noah handing him tools with the focused seriousness of an indispensable assistant. The house looked like itself. It looked like home. And so, Noah concluded, I think the written agreement is actually better than what we had before, because it's more formal and Mrs. Kim says formal systems are more reliable. She's right, Derek said. I know. Noah unbuckled his seatbelt. What's for dinner? I was thinking pasta. With the red sauce or the other one? Red. Good, Noah said. The other one is fine, but the red one is better. Derek turned off the car. They sat for a second in the quiet of the driveway, the engine ticking as it cooled, the neighborhood sounds settling around them. Someone's dog, a car passing, the specific ambient texture of an ordinary street on an ordinary evening. Dad? Noah said. Yeah. Today was a good day. Derek looked at his son. The serious face, the dark eyes, the hair that still needed cutting, and always would because it was one of those things that kept getting moved down the list. Yeah, he said. It was. They went inside. Derek made pasta with the red sauce. Noah set the table with the efficiency of someone who had been doing it long enough to have opinions about the correct placement of forks. They ate. Noah talked. Derek listened and ate and thought about nothing in particular and everything at once. The way you do on the days when the weight you've been carrying has shifted to something more like ballast. Still there, but working for you instead of against you. Outside the kitchen window, the first tentative signs of early spring were maybe 2 weeks away, though neither of them knew that yet. The rosebush on the front lawn was just a brown tangle of canes in the dark, ordinary and alive, waiting for its moment the way things do when they've made up their minds to come back. Spring came the way it always does in North Carolina, not all at once, but in arguments, warm days interrupted by cold ones, the trees making commitments and then hedging them, the rosebush on Birch Street putting out small red shoots that Derek noticed one Saturday morning in early March while drinking coffee on the front step before Noah was awake. He stood there in his socks on the cold concrete and looked at those shoots for a longer moment than was strictly necessary, and then went inside and made breakfast, and that was the beginning of the season changing. The Foundation's Carmichael program had its first formal community safety event 6 weeks after the trial ended. Not a ribbon cutting. Derek had specifically declined the ribbon cutting that Vivian's communications team had suggested because ribbon cuttings were for people who wanted photographs of ribbon cuttings. And what Carmichael needed was not photographs, but a parking lot in the evening with folding tables and people from the neighborhood learning how to use a defibrillator and talking to each other about the 2 blocks where the streetlights had been out for 8 months. Diane Patterson organized the tables. Marcus brought 14 of his kids to help with setup and ended up staying to learn the defibrillator training himself, which he then taught to 3 of the older teenagers with the patient authority of someone who had been waiting his whole life to have something worth teaching. Vic, the retired paramedic, ran the medical response portion with a directness that stripped out all the bureaucratic hedging that usually makes training feel like a liability exercise rather than actual learning. He had a way of looking at whoever he was demonstrating on and saying, "You just saved someone's life. Do it again." That made people want to do it again. By the end of the evening, 23 people from the Carmichael corridor had AED certification cards, which was 23 more than had existed in that neighborhood the morning before. Derek stood at the edge of the parking lot and watched it happen and did not feel the need to stand in the middle of it, which was a thing he'd had to learn, that being the person who made something possible was not the same as being the person who needed to be seen making it possible. He was still learning it. He had a tendency to want to be useful at a physical, present level and had to actively remind himself that building the structure so other people could be useful was its own kind of work and not a lesser one. Vivian came. She hadn't announced that she was coming. She arrived at 7:15 in a car that was notably less conspicuous than her usual, with Rachel but without the full security footprint, and she stood near the back of the parking lot and watched. And when Derek found her there, she was looking at Vic running the training with an expression he'd seen before, the recalibration expression, the one that meant she was adjusting her understanding of something upward. "This is different from what I pictured," she said. "Good different or bad different?" "Very good different." She watched a teenage girl, maybe 16, Marcus's program. Derek had seen her before, successfully demonstrate chest compressions on the training mannequin while the other kids watched. "It doesn't look like a charity event." "It's not," Derek said. "It's a neighborhood doing something for itself with some support behind it. Those are different things." "You've said that before." "Because it keeps being true." She looked at him. She was wearing a coat he hadn't seen before, dark green, more casual than her usual, the kind of thing you wear when you're not trying to look like the person funding the event. He appreciated that she understood that distinction without having to be told. "The board meeting next week," she said. "They're going to ask about expansion timelines. I want to tell them Eastfield by September." "Eastfield by July," Derek said. "Vic's team is ready now. We've been holding back on the formal launch, waiting for the certification paperwork, but that clears next month. We don't need September." She made a note on her phone. "July," she said. "Done." She paused. "They're also going to ask about you." "About me." "About whether the foundation has the right leadership long term. There are board members who," she chose her words, "who expected someone more traditionally credentialed." "I know," Derek said. "What do you tell them?" "The truth," she said, "that the Carmichael enrollment is up 400% from what any previous community initiative achieved in the first 60 days, and that 2 additional neighborhoods have formally requested programming, and that the phrase safe ground is appearing in city council discussions without any prompting from our communications team." She paused. "Then I let them object. And if they push—" "Nobody pushes me successfully in my own boardroom," she said. "You've seen me in a federal courtroom. The boardroom is easier." He almost smiled. "Fair enough." Across the parking lot, Diane Patterson was organizing the tables for the second portion of the evening, the less structured part, the part where people just talked and exchanged numbers and figured out who lived 2 blocks from whom and had been solving the same problem from different directions without knowing it. This was the part that looked the least like a program and was actually the most important part, the connective tissue that made everything else hold. Diane ran it without any framework because she'd been running versions of it her whole adult life, and understood instinctively that the framework is what you build when you don't trust the people, and she trusted these people. "She should be on the Foundation's advisory board," Vivian said, watching Diane. "She won't do it officially," Derek said. "I already asked. She said advisory boards are where good ideas go to be discussed instead of done." Vivian laughed. The real one, the unauthorized one. "She's not wrong. I offered her a consultant arrangement instead. She said she'd think about it, which from Diane means yes, but she wants a week to make sure the terms are right." "Smart woman." "Very." They stood there together in the parking lot for a while, not talking, watching the event move through its own momentum. The evening was cold but not punishing, and the parking lot lights made everything look slightly warmer than it was. Noah was not there. It was a school night, and he was at Mrs. Alvarez's, which he'd accepted without protest because Derek had promised him a full debrief and had learned from experience that a full debrief was, to Noah, approximately equivalent to being there. Derek would go home later and sit at the kitchen table and tell his son everything that had happened in order, and Noah would ask precise questions and probably draw a map. At some point, Rachel materialized at Vivian's elbow with the particular efficiency of someone who had been giving space and had now decided the appropriate amount of space had been given. "Car in 20, what?" she said to Vivian. 10 minutes, Vivian said. Rachel receded. Vivian looked at Derek. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and it is not a professional question." "Okay." She looked at the parking lot, at the event they'd built together, so not in the planning sense, but in the larger, accumulated sense. The months of work that had started in an alley in the rain and arrived here. "Are we doing this right?" she said. "You and me, whatever this is." Derek looked at her. It was a fair question and deserved a fair answer. "I don't know," he said. "I'm not good at—" He stopped, found the honest version. "I've been in exactly one serious relationship in my adult life, and it ended with her leaving when Noah was 18 months old. I don't have a great model to work from." "I've been in 2, Vivian said. "Both of them ended because I was better at running a company than being present in a relationship, which is something I was told both times, and both times chose not to fully hear." She paused. "I hear it now. For what that's worth." "It's worth something." She looked at him. "So neither of us is particularly qualified." "No," he agreed. "But we're here. We're here." She was quiet for a moment. "Thursday evenings," she said, "after the weekly meeting, if you don't have Noah, could we—" Just exists somewhere that isn't a conference room or a courtroom or a parking lot, dinner or something ordinary. He considered this. The word ordinary was doing significant work in that sentence. She meant it specifically. Not a statement dinner, not something for appearances, just the ordinary construction of two people figuring out if they work together outside of a crisis. Yeah, he said. Thursday evenings. Rachel reappeared. Car, she said, with the finality of someone who has already given a 10-minute extension. Vivian looked at Derek one more time. Good night, she said. Night, he said. She left. He stayed. He stayed for another hour, until the last table was cleared and the last neighbor had exchanged the last phone number, and Diane was doing the final walkthrough of the parking lot with a trash bag and the particular satisfaction of someone who has just watched a thing she believed in actually happen. Derek helped her with the last two tables. She didn't tell him he didn't need to. She also didn't thank him, which he appreciated, because the thanks would have made it transactional, and it wasn't. Same time next month? She asked, folding the last table. Same time next month, he said, and Vic wants to add a home fire safety component. Tell him yes, she said. 3 families on my block don't have working smoke detectors. I'll get him the supplies. She nodded. She picked up the trash bag. Then she stopped and looked at him with the direct look she used for important things. You know what's different about you? She said. Tell me. You don't explain yourself, she said. Every other foundation person, every other initiative person, they come in and spend the first 6 months explaining what they're doing and why and what their philosophy is. You just do things and then do more things. She paused. My mother used to say you can tell what a person actually believes by what they do when nobody's looking. You do the same things whether I'm looking or not. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said, I learned it from people who were better at it than me. Hold on to them, she said, and walked to her car. He drove home. The city was quiet, the particular 11 o'clock quiet of a Tuesday in early spring, and he drove through it thinking about nothing urgent for the first time in a long time, which was its own kind of luxury he'd stopped noticing he'd missed until he had it back. Noah was asleep when he got to Mrs. Alvarez's, as expected. Derek carried him to the car with the practiced ease of someone who had been carrying this specific sleeping person for 7 years and knew his weight and the particular way his head drops to the left. Noah stirred in the car, not quite waking, and said something indistinct that included the word Gerald, which suggested he was dreaming about the koi, and Derek drove them home through the quiet streets and got him into bed and stood in the doorway for a moment with his hand on the light switch. 47 dinosaurs. The spreadsheet printout Vivian had given him tacked to the corkboard above his desk with the precision of someone who understood that data has value and should be displayed accordingly. A crayon drawing of the estate pond that Noah had done from memory, including 3 fish labeled with their names in his crooked, careful handwriting. The twice-erased math problem framed. Derek had framed it because Noah had crumpled it to throw away, and Derek had uncrumpled it and framed it while Noah wasn't looking. And it was now on the shelf because some things deserve to be kept. He turned off the light, went to bed, slept clean. The Thursday evenings became a thing, not a dramatic thing, not candlelight and declarations, nothing that looked cinematic from outside, which was mostly the point. The first Thursday was a diner 2 miles from the foundation office, the kind of place with laminated menus and coffee that gets refilled without asking. And they sat for 2 hours and talked about things that had nothing to do with the foundation or the trial or the estate or anything that had happened. Vivian had grown up in Richmond, Virginia, the youngest of 3, with a father who was an engineer and a mother who taught high school chemistry and who had, according to Vivian, a very low tolerance for imprecision in any form, which explained several things. She'd been interested in finance since she was 12, which her siblings had found bewildering and her mother had found promising. Were you always, Derek started, driven? She made a face at the word. People say driven like it's a compliment, but it mostly means I was not great at being in the same room as people who weren't working on something. Is that still true? She thought about it honestly. Less than it was. The last year has... She paused. Things have shifted. I look at what you've built in Carmichael, and I think about what I spent the last decade building, and I keep asking myself whether I built the right things. Sterling Capital isn't the wrong thing, he said. No, but it's not. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. It doesn't do what SafeGround does. It doesn't put AED cards in people's hands. It funded SafeGround, he said. Different tools, same direction, if you point them right. She looked at him. You actually believe that? I actually believe that. She was quiet a moment. I spent a long time thinking that what I built was the point, she said. The company, the capital, the structure. And now I think the point is what you do with it, and I'm still working out what that means. You have time, he said. I'm 30 years old. Yeah, he said. You have time. She almost smiled. You have a very annoying way of making things sound simple without actually making them simple. It's a gift, he said. It's mildly aggravating. Also a gift. She did smile then, the real one, and looked down at her coffee, and Derek drank his and looked at the diner and felt something that he didn't have a clean word for. Not happiness exactly, which always sounds too complete, but something in the same family. The particular satisfaction of a moment that is exactly what it is and doesn't need to be anything else. The second Thursday was a walk. The third was takeout at his kitchen table because it was raining, and neither of them wanted to go back out. And Noah was at Mrs. Alvarez's. And they sat at the kitchen table where Noah did his homework and ate Thai food from containers and talked for 3 hours about nothing in particular and everything that mattered, the way people do when they're in the process of genuinely knowing each other rather than presenting themselves to be known. It was on the fourth Thursday that Vivian met the 47 dinosaurs officially. Derek had mentioned them enough times that she'd asked to see them, which Noah had overheard on a phone call Derek had taken in the kitchen while Noah was ostensibly doing homework, but was in practice listening to everything. And Noah had taken this as a formal invitation and had offered to provide a guided tour. She came on a Sunday afternoon instead of a Thursday. The Sundays were less protected, more available, the days when Derek cooked actual food, and Noah did whatever Noah did on Sundays, which was currently a research project into North Carolina freshwater fish species that had started with Gerald and broadened considerably. She sat in the living room with Noah standing in front of the shelf where the dinosaurs lived, delivering what was clearly a prepared presentation. These are organized by period, Noah said, not by size or type, because organizing them by size or type would be scientifically inaccurate given how much variation there is within each period, Vivian said. Noah looked at her with the expression of someone who has just had their sentence finished correctly by an unexpected source. Right, he said. Exactly. He recalibrated slightly in the way of a presenter who has encountered an informed audience. So these are the Triassic ones. They're smaller because the large-scale sauropod development came later, she said. Noah set down the small Triassic specimen he'd been holding and stared at her. Do you know a lot about dinosaurs? I know some things, she said. My nephew went through a very comprehensive dinosaur phase. I paid attention. How old is your nephew? 12 now? He's moved on to astronomy. Noah processed this trajectory with the mixture of respect and mild disbelief of someone who cannot personally imagine moving on. I'm not going to move on, he said. You might, she said, and that's okay. I won't, he said, firmly, but without hostility. But if I do, I'd probably go to marine biology, because of Gerald. Derek, from the kitchen doorway, watched his son explain the Cretaceous specimens to Vivian with the same serious investment he'd brought to the koi data and the hamster monitoring protocol and the twice-erased math homework. Vivian received it with genuine attention, asked questions that showed she'd actually listened to the previous answers, and at one point disagreed with Noah's characterization of the relative intelligence of certain species. Cited sources, her nephew apparently had left her with actual information, and Noah went silent for 3 seconds in the manner of someone encountering legitimate counter-evidence before saying, I'll have to check that, which was the most rigorous intellectual response available to him. Derek went back to the kitchen, made coffee, stood at the counter and listened to the murmur of his son and this woman talking about dinosaurs in his living room and felt the full weight of the moment, not dramatically, not with swelling music behind it, just with the quiet recognition that his life had changed substantially, and not in the way he would have designed it, and significantly for the better, which was usually how the meaningful changes came. 6 months after the trial ended, Martin Gale was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. Reyes texted Derek the sentencing from the courthouse. He was in a community meeting in the Eastfield district at the time. The program had launched in July, on schedule, and had in its first 8 weeks exceeded the Carmichael early numbers, which had seemed unlikely until Vic pointed out that Eastfield had infrastructure Carmichael had lacked, and that good programs grow faster in prepared ground. Derek stepped out of the meeting briefly to read the text, stood in the hallway of the community center for a moment, then went back in. He told Vivian later. She was at her desk when he called, and he heard the sound of her sitting back in her chair, the specific creak of it, familiar from weeks of Thursday evenings and Sunday afternoons and all the accumulated small moments that make a person's environment recognizable at a distance. 22 years, she said. Yes. A pause. How do you feel? He thought about it. Like something closed, he said. Not fixed, just closed. That's the right word, she said. Closed. Another pause. Are you okay? Yeah. You? Yes? He heard her exhale. Derek, do you think about it? The alley, still. Sometimes, he said honestly. Not the way I used to. It used to run on a loop in the first few weeks. Not the fight, but the moment before. The sound that made me turn. What about it now? He thought about how to say it accurately. Now when I think about it, I mostly think about what came after, which was all of this. He paused. I don't regret it. I stopped wondering if I should have walked past it. You couldn't have, she said. No, I couldn't have. He paused. Neither could you, in your position. You didn't have to build the foundation. You didn't have to give me a reason to stay in it. I didn't give you a reason, she said. You came with your own. You gave me the structure for it. She was quiet for a moment. We're good together, she said. At the work. We are. And the other thing. Yeah, he said. And the other thing. He heard her smile. He'd learned to hear it, the small change in her voice when it happened. Thursday, she said. Thursday, he said. The year turned. The foundation expanded. A third neighborhood, then a fourth, then a city in Georgia, reaching out formally to ask whether the Carmichael model could be adapted for their context, which Derek and Marcus worked through together over 2 months of careful conversations with the Georgia team, and which resulted in a framework document that Derek wrote in plain language because he had no patience for the kind of nonprofit language that obscures what it's describing. The framework was 17 pages and had 3 words that needed a glossary and was, Vivian told him, the clearest program document she'd ever seen come out of this kind of work. You wrote it like a field manual, she said, reading it. That's what it is, he said. Marcus got a salary. A real one, not a stipend. He'd resisted initially, a specific and familiar kind of resistance. The resistance of someone who has operated on nothing for long enough that being compensated feels like a category error, like the work changes its nature if you're paid for it. Derek sat with him in the Carmichael Rec Center and had the conversation directly. The work is the work, he said. You getting paid doesn't change what the work is. It changes whether you can keep doing it. Marcus looked at him. You sound like you've said this before. To myself, Derek said, a lot. Marcus took the salary. He also, around this time, started talking about getting a degree. Social work or public health, he wasn't sure yet. And Derek told him the foundation would support it, which was not something Derek had formally cleared with the board, but which he cleared the following week, and which the board approved after 7 minutes of discussion because the numbers Marcus produced were the kind of numbers boards respond to, and because Vivian had learned, over months of working with Derek, that the things he proposed without first getting approval were the things he'd already thought through more carefully than the approval process would have. Noah turned 8 in April. His birthday party was at the rec center in Carmichael, which had been his specific request once he'd heard about the space from Derek's descriptions, and which resulted in 12 8-year-olds running around a space originally designed for adult community meetings while Vic looked mildly alarmed and Diane Patterson provided cake because she'd heard there was a party and had apparently decided that meant cake was required. Marcus organized a scavenger hunt that was more sophisticated than anything Derek would have designed because Marcus had 23 kids in his program who'd had input. Vivian came. She brought a gift that was 3 books about freshwater fish biology. Serious ones, with actual data, not the illustrated children's versions. And Noah held them for a long moment before looking at her with the full, unguarded face and saying, "These are real science books." "You're a real scientist," she said. Approximately, he agreed, which from Noah meant he was still building evidence. He filed the books beside the coy spreadsheet printout on his shelf that evening. Derek watched him do it, the careful placement, the alignment with the edge, and thought about the rosebush on the front lawn, which had come fully back in the spring with a stubbornness that Derek found personally satisfying, and was now in the middle of its second summer flush, red blooms that Noah had taken to checking on in the mornings the same way he'd once checked on Gerald. Some things come back. It was not a complicated observation. It didn't require heavy framing. It was just true, verifiably true. The way the twice-erased 11 and the framed math problem and the living rosebush were all true in specific and particular ways. The conversation happened on a Sunday in late September, 14 months after the alley, after Noah was asleep and Vivian was at the kitchen table with tea, and Derek was at the counter not doing anything in particular, the comfortable domestic nothing of 2 people who have gotten used to being in the same space. It happened because Derek said something, which was less characteristic than Vivian saying something, but had been building in him for a while and arrived at the right moment. "I need to tell you something," he said. She looked up from her tea, read his face. "Okay." He came to the table, sat across from her. He stopped, started correctly. "When I left the Navy, I thought the only thing I was going to be was Noah's father. That was the whole plan, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was the only thing that mattered." He looked at his hands. "I didn't think there was going to be anything else. I didn't let myself think about it because thinking about it felt like wanting something I didn't have a right to want." She was very still. "I was wrong about that," he said. "And I've known I was wrong about it for a while, and I've been sitting with it and not saying it because—" He stopped. "Because saying it changes things, and things were already changed enough." "Derek," she said. "I'm in love with you," he said. "I need you to know that, not because I'm ready to, not because I have any idea what that looks like going forward, but because it's true, and I've been not saying it, and I'm done not saying it." The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car went past. Vivian looked at him with the trying to understand expression, and then the expression shifted into something he hadn't seen before. Not the professional composure, not the real smile, not the recalibration face. Something that was all of them at once, and none of them specifically. Something that was just her. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "You know." "I've known for a while." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I was waiting for you to say it because you needed to say it first. I understand how you work well enough to know that. That's—" he paused. "A little aggravating." "I know." Now the smile. "I'm in love with you too, for the record." He looked at her for a long moment. "The record," he said. "Officially noted," she said. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She turned her hand over and held on. They stayed like that for a while. Not dramatically, not performing anything for anyone, just 2 people sitting in a kitchen at night with the ordinary evidence of a life around them, holding on. "What does this look like?" she asked after a while. "I don't know exactly," he said, "but I know the important parts." "Which are?" "Noah," he said. "The work. Being honest. Not pretending things are something they're not." He paused. "Going slow enough that it builds right." She considered this. "I can do that." "I know you can." "I'm not good at slow," she said. "For full disclosure." "I know," he said. "I'll remind you when it's necessary." "You'll be annoying about it." "Probably." She looked at their hands on the table. "Okay," she said. "Then that's what it looks like." They did not become something overnight. That was the part of it that was most true and most human. The gradual accumulation of ordinary Sundays and Thursday evenings, and kitchen table conversations, and the specific small negotiations of two imperfect people choosing each other incrementally, without fanfare, in the way that real things are built. There were difficult conversations about the difference between her world and his, about what Noah needed and what he understood, about the specific anxieties that Derek carried from years of doing everything alone, and the specific anxieties Vivian carried from years of defining herself entirely by what she built. Those conversations were not elegant. Some of them ended without resolution and resumed the following week. That was fine. Resolution is not always the point. Sometimes the point is that you keep coming back to the table. Noah knew. He was 8, and he was Noah, so of course he knew. He'd known since the estate, probably, with the specific awareness of a child who watches everything and stores it for later analysis. He didn't say anything about it for a long time, which was so completely characteristic that Derek almost asked him about it just to acknowledge the restraint. Eventually, on an evening when Vivian had stayed late and left and Derek was washing dishes, Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway and said, "Dad?" "Yeah." "I like it when Vivian comes over." Derek kept washing dishes. "Yeah?" "She asks real questions," Noah said, "like she actually wants to know the answers." "She does." "Some adults ask questions and you can tell they're just being polite." He leaned against the door frame. "She's not doing that." "No," Derek agreed. Noah was quiet for a moment. "Is she going to keep coming over?" Derek turned off the tap, turned around, looked at his son. "Yeah," he said. "She is." Noah nodded, the inventory taking eyes. "Good," he said, and went back to his room. Derek stood in the kitchen for a moment, then he dried his hands and finished the dishes, and that was that, and it was enough. And it was the right amount of enough for that specific evening, which is all evenings ever have to be. The foundation had its 1-year anniversary event in October. Not a gala. Derek had declined a gala, and the compromise was a community gathering at the Carmichael Rec Center that was technically a larger version of the monthly parking lot events, with the addition of a short program where Diane spoke and Marcus spoke and Vic spoke, and Derek said approximately 4 sentences, which was by design because the point of the evening was not Derek. The point was the 41 neighborhoods they were now working with and the 212 certified emergency responders who hadn't existed a year ago, and the youth programs in 6 cities, and the city council members in 3 states who were citing Safe Ground by name in budget discussions. A journalist from a national publication came. She wanted to write a profile of Derek, the former SEAL who'd stopped a kidnapping and built something out of the aftermath. He spent 20 minutes with her and was polite but gave her almost nothing she could use, not from hostility but from genuine disinterest in being the center of the story. He told her to talk to Marcus. He told her to talk to Diane. He told her to go to the Eastfield program on a Wednesday evening and watch Vic run the training and talk to the people who came. She wrote the piece anyway, wrote it about the program, largely, with Derek as a presence at the edges rather than the center, which was more accurate than what she'd originally planned. Diane called him after it ran and said, "That's the first time I've been quoted in something that actually said what I said." "I talked to her about accuracy," he said. "It shows," she said. "Good work." "It's your work," he said, "and Marcus's, and Vic's." "You built the structure," she said. "Don't pretend you didn't build the structure." "I gave you the resources to build what you already knew how to build," he said. "That," Diane said, "is also not nothing." He knew that. He'd learned it over 14 months of watching what happened when you gave prepared people the room to do what they were capable of. The lesson was not complicated. Most people, given genuine support and genuine trust, will do more than anyone expected. The problem was usually not the people. The problem was usually the absence of support and trust, which were less expensive to provide than the cost of their absence, and which almost nobody provided because almost nobody believed the math. Derek believed the math. He'd seen it in the Navy, the difference between a team given real authority and one managed by anxiety. And he saw it in Carmichael and Eastfield and every neighborhood that Safe Ground touched. You trust people. You give them what they need. You get out of the way. It sounds simple. And it is simple. In the same way that most true things are simple, and most simple things are hard. He was in the foundation office on a Wednesday morning, 11 months after the one-year anniversary, working through the framework document for the Georgia program's expansion, when his phone rang. Vivian's number. He answered. "The board approved the national expansion," she said, without preamble. He put his pen down. "All of it?" "All of it. 15 new cities in the first phase, budget allocation through the next 3 years. And—" He heard her take a breath that was not quite steady, which was unusual for her. "The endowment. The permanent endowment I've been negotiating with the board for 6 months. It's approved." The endowment meant the foundation existed beyond any single decision by Sterling Capital Group. It meant Safe Ground was a permanent institution. It meant Marcus and Diane and Vic and the 212 certified emergency responders and the 41 neighborhoods were not dependent on anyone's continued goodwill. Derek sat in his office with its wall map and yellow legal pads and the gas station coffee cup that had become a permanent fixture because he'd never located a coffee place he actually preferred and had stopped looking. He sat there and felt the full weight of it. Not triumph exactly, because Derek Callahan did not experience triumph as a clean feeling, but something honest and solid, the specific weight of something that is real and will remain real. "Derek," Vivian said. "Yeah, we did it." "You did a lot of it," he said. "So did you." "Yeah," he said. "So did I." He could hear her smiling. "I'm coming over Sunday," she said. "Noah mentioned he has new fish data." "He's been tracking them for a month," Derek said, "at Mrs. Alvarez's pond. She got coy." Vivian laughed. "Of course she did. He talked her into it. I wasn't consulted." "You were never going to be consulted," she said. "Noah has a way of just doing things." "He gets it from somewhere," Derek said. "He gets it from you," she said. He thought about that. About Noah and the 47 dinosaurs and the handwritten goodbye card left by a pond at a rented estate during the worst weeks of their year, and the rosebush that came back, and the twice-erased 11 in a frame on a shelf, and Mrs. Alvarez's soup, and Diane's 12-item list, and Marcus's dream list with the LOL in the title that wasn't a dream list anymore. He thought about a parking lot in Carmichael on a cold March night and 23 people with AED cards they hadn't had that morning. He thought about a rainy night outside a hotel, a sound that was wrong, the half-second decision to turn. He had been asked, more than once in the 14 months since, whether he regretted it. The injury, the attention, the 3 months of threat and uncertainty in the photograph on the kitchen table. He understood why people asked. It was a reasonable question about a sequence of events that had cost real things. He gave the same answer every time, not because it was polished, but because it was the only true one. No, not for a second. Because the alley hadn't changed him. It had found him. It had found the person he already was, in the specific way that certain moments find specific people, not randomly, but because the person was already standing in that particular posture, already turned toward trouble rather than away from it, already the kind of man who moved before the thinking finished. He hadn't rescued Vivian Sterling because she was worth rescuing in some hierarchical sense. He'd turned toward the alley because someone needed help, and he was the person standing there. That was still the whole answer. It didn't require embellishment or a larger frame. Some things are what they are, and what they are is enough. And the life that follows from being exactly what you are in the moment that most requires it. That life is its own argument, its own justification, its own kind of proof. "Sunday?" Derek said. "Sunday," Vivian confirmed. He hung up, sat in the quiet of the office for a moment, then picked up his pen and went back to the framework document, because there were 15 new cities, and they needed structure, and the structure needed to be right. And Derek Callahan had never in his life been the kind of man who left that work for someone else when he was the one sitting at the desk. Outside, Raleigh was doing what it did on weekday mornings in September. Moving, continuous, everyone inside their particular version of forward. Across the city, in the Carmichael corridor, Marcus was opening the rec center for the morning session. In Eastfield, Vic was sending emails about the fall training schedule. In a second-grade classroom across town, a 9-year-old boy with opinions about paleontology was doing math with the focused seriousness of someone who had decided that accuracy mattered, writing his answers clean and correct on the first try because he had learned from the person who loved him most that getting it right was worth the effort, and that doing it over until it was right was not failure but the actual work, and that some things deserve to be kept exactly as they are, framed on a shelf, proof that the trying happened and that it was enough and then some.